Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christys tonight, 9 till 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall?
Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQs live here on GB News. Every Wednesday we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions when Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer go head-to-head in the House of Commons.
We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQs live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this?
Are you rethinking this policy?
Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox,
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News.
Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 12 o'clock on Tuesday, the 30th of January.
Well, let's cross straight over to Westminster because in the last few minutes, the Northern Ireland Secretary, Chris Heaton-Harris, has been speaking.
Good afternoon, everyone. I welcome the very significant step from Sir Geoffrey Donaldson, the step he took last night. I'm very grateful to Sir Geoffrey and his colleagues for the leadership that he and they have displayed and the constructive nature of our dialogue over the past few months. Throughout our discussions, it has never been in doubt that Sir Geoffrey's prime concern was to secure and reinforce Northern Ireland's place in the Union. I would also like to thank the other political parties in Northern Ireland for the patience they have shown during this time. I'm pleased that the DUP have agreed to accept the package of measures that the UK government has put forward, and as a result they are ready to return to the Northern Ireland Assembly and nominate representatives to the Northern Ireland Executive. I can confirm that today I've updated the Cabinet on this significant development. And as agreed with Sir Geoffrey, and obviously subject to the finalisation of all party talks today, I will tomorrow publish the details of the proposals we have made to secure Northern Ireland's place in the UK internal market and to strengthen the Union. I believe that all the conditions are now in place for the Assembly to return, and I look forward very much to the restoration of the institutions at Stormont as soon as possible. There was a financial package worth over £3 billion offered to the parties before Christmas. This will absolutely be available to an incoming executive. The parties entitled to form an executive are meeting today to discuss these matters, and I hope we'll be able to finalise this deal with those parties as soon as possible and move forward. And after that, I'm happy for questions.
What has changed to get to this position? Does it have any bearing on parties like Northern Irish GBs can diverge?
No, it hasn't affected divergence in any way, shape or form. However, what has changed has been, I guess, an understanding on my part of the needs of unionism in Northern Ireland and on the UK government's part, and a very long conversation with the Democratic Unionist Party on how we can make better Northern Ireland's place in our internal market.
Emma, UTV. Are you prepared to release the money now for public sector pay awards as a goodwill gesture?
As I say, the financial package will be available to the incoming executive.
Sam Coates, Sky.
Secretary of State, to repeat, what has changed? Are there going to be fewer checks on goods coming from Great Britain to Northern Ireland? How will Northern Ireland's place be different under this deal than it was previously? Or is it just a smoke? Nothing really changed?
There are some significant changes, but you will have to wait until the packages, well, not the package is finalised, but the all party talks are finalised, and when I publish the deal in Parliament, everyone will see what it is.
How can there be a deal on the basis of a secret package?
It's not a secret package. We've been talking because it is Sam. It's been a negotiation, and the negotiations have been between the Democratic Unionist Party and the UK government. We have been talking to them over a period of weeks and months. There is a package in place now that we are now briefing the Northern Ireland political parties on. There are all-party talks going on this afternoon in Northern Ireland, which I'm going to head off after this press conference too. When they have finalised, I'll be in a position to publish, and I will.
Chris Mason, BBC.
Thank you. Just picking up on Sam's question, Secretary of State, on the specifics of goods that are travelling from GB to Northern Ireland, is it right that they will be able to make that journey without checks and without paperwork? Just to follow up the question earlier about the money, particularly on the strikes coming on Thursday, you're explicitly saying that money doesn't get released until the point that the injuries you saw. In other words, in all likelihood, it will appear beyond that point on Thursday.
So yes, the money is available to an incoming executive. And so when the executive sits, that money will be freely available to that executive to deal with as it sees fit, and public pay is rightly a matter that is devolved, and so I believe they're the right people to be doing that element of this business. When it comes to, I'm afraid you will, Chris, have to wait to see the deal, but we have been able to achieve quite a vast array of decent improvements to make sure our internal market works properly as it should do, and you'll hopefully be able to see those tomorrow.
John, RTE.
I and government colleagues talk to our European Union partners on a regular basis, and I will continue to do so.
Well, that was Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, Chris Heaton-Harris, almost explaining the deal that has been struck to allow governments to return to Northern Ireland. To reiterate, Northern Ireland has been without an executive, without a government, for 2 years now. And that's meant that there haven't been, across the board, pay rises for public servants. It's meant that public services have been struggling because there's been no executive that can run these things, that can change these things over 2 years of a period of fairly high inflation.
Yes, they've been in a state of political paralysis. Is this a step in the right direction, or is this the breakthrough we've all been hoping for? Let's cross to Stormont now and speak to GB News Northern Ireland reporter Doogie Beattie. Doogie, thank you very much for joining us. We just heard there from the Northern Ireland Secretary over here. What is your take on what we've seen overnight?
Well, we were in press conferences after 2 o'clock in the morning this morning, and yes, all saying that they're happy with the deal. No yet meat on the bones. It's not there. we haven't seen this yet, but we pretty much know what they have been talking about over the past few months. It's been going on, the deal has been going on for a year since the framework document, but really in the last few months, as often in these deals in the last few hours, that's when things start really coming together. And it's all been around trade and how goods move inside the UK, because of course Northern Ireland was held outside the UK legislation, which meant that we had to have green and red lanes checking our goods coming in, and problems really around third world, rest of world trading. That's goods coming from a third country to a third country and then entering Northern Ireland. And 70% of Northern Ireland's trade is with the UK, it's not with the EU, and that was hurting businesses rather badly in Northern Ireland, and it was looking at an all-Ireland economy. And even in the protocol, it actually, the text that it said the protocol was there to protect an all-Ireland economy. I do believe that will probably be changed. The lanes have very much reduced, and trade issues are no longer the same as they used to be because of this deal. I can't really go too much in the minutiae of it, Tom, of what I do know of it, but I can assure you that it is a lot better than the deal that was there, but it actually makes you wonder why they just didn't do it in the first place. This is going to be published tomorrow after all party talks have taken place here in Stormont. I'm just standing here at the moment looking straight down to see some of the politicians coming in, and they will shift into those press conferences, and what will happen then is they will start to negotiate of which ministers are going into which departments. And because of how the Northern Ireland government is put in place under the Hunt, one party nominates, then the next, then it goes back again, and they all pick out the departments what they want. So in the next few days, the timetable now does seem to be set. In these few days, the British government will legislate, it will come into law, and then probably Saturday, I would imagine, that the Northern Ireland Assembly will elect a speaker, and from there on in, Northern Ireland will once again have governance.
It's a hugely significant moment for Northern Ireland to finally have government again, at least perhaps by this weekend. But it does seem like it's an iterative process. The Northern Ireland Secretary was saying there's £3 billion there now on the table for public services in Northern Ireland. But he didn't go into detail in terms of what this shoring up of the internal market of the UK will look like. He said it would make better Northern Ireland's place within the United Kingdom internal market. But we're going to have to wait until tomorrow to see what these details are. I suppose we can only really go off the word of the DUP. They seem satisfied by this arrangement.
Well, they do, because the DUP do realise that the union is not just in law. The union is when people feel happy in a place, well, then they're not going to vote to be somewhere else. And you've got to remember there's three borders in Northern Ireland. There's the customs border that was put into place in 1926 by the Republic of Ireland. That's now in the Irish Sea. You have the constitutional border in Northern Ireland, which is still sovereign. It doesn't ever move. Unless, of course, there's a referendum. And then you have a NATO border in Northern Ireland, because, don't forget, the Republic of Ireland are no longer in NATO. So because of east-west bodies that's being set up, there is a look at how unionist culture will be more to the fore, and financial packages in and around state aid, because of course we were stopped from having state aid in Northern Ireland. It was capped at 20 million by the EU. So the likes of that huge gigafactory that was built outside Sunderland, or it is being built, that state aid couldn't have came to Northern Ireland for that, because GB, as far as they're concerned, is a third country. So why would any foreign direct investment come into Northern Ireland? So we can only imagine in that deal that also will have been addressed and levelled the playing field and made people in Northern Ireland feel happier where they are. Wages running right, schools running right, services running right, and most of all, businesses running right.
And Doogie, any idea of how this is being viewed by the European Commission? I understand that they're reviewing various documents.
Well, they will be, because there are quite a few plays to unionism in this, and if you look at that, Italy could be asking for exactly the same thing. So could Spain, and if Northern Ireland is taking goods from, say, Australia into Britain, they're being brought in as raw materials into Britain, then made into a product that's then brought into Northern Ireland to be brought into a finalised product and then put back in to the EU or the UK. Other European countries will be saying, we want that same deal. So Europe has had to walk a very, very fine line in this. And it's not surprising to me that they are examining the very details of this, because I think part of the problem with the secrecy around this was that they didn't want to involve other countries that may be asking for the same sort of conditions to operate in.
Doogie, that is a really fascinating point, and do stay with us. We're going to take this point now to Sean Woodward, the former Northern Ireland Secretary. Sean, thank you so much for joining us. What our reporter Doogie Beattie was explaining there is, to some extent, what people have described as a dual regulatory regime. Northern Ireland experiencing UK regulations and EU regulations at the same time. Things that are legal in the UK are legal in Northern Ireland. Things that are legal in the EU are illegal in Northern Ireland. It's almost like it's got the best of both worlds. Is this a unique situation now for Northern Ireland?
Well, everything about Northern Ireland is pretty unique. So why would this be any different? Look, I think the first thing to say is it's good news that we are actually going to see government coming back into Northern Ireland. We've had nearly 2 years of effectively no government in Northern Ireland, and that's not been good for people in any shape or form. The second is my congratulations to Jeffrey Donaldson, because there are a lot of people who thought that he wouldn't be able to unite the party enough to get agreement over the line. It's taken the best part of a year since the Windsor Framework to do that, but he's pulled it off. And I think he must be feeling pretty relieved this morning. And having said that, it's not just about Jeffrey Donaldson. My real concern for what was happening in Northern Ireland was it was testing the political institutions to destruction. And that if they didn't get back, we saw in the last few weeks the public on the streets of Northern Ireland protesting over problems. And there were real challenges coming towards the political institutions by there being no government. So I think the DUP has been led by Jeffrey in a way which has basically said, look, guys, you might disagree with this. You may not be entirely happy with even now what's being offered. And they're getting a pretty large bung of $3 billion to help them along the way. But nonetheless, a lot of people in the DUP hold out on points of principle. Jeffrey managed to negotiate that. And I think it's hats off to him, but also hats off to the DUP, which has decided it wants to remain a relevant political entity within unionism and the main lion within unionism. And that will help undoubtedly by getting them back into government now.
And Sean, just to clarify or confirm, this will definitely see the DUP return to power sharing, a return to government in Northern Ireland.
Yeah, I don't see any reason why this won't happen. I mean, the key meeting that Jeffrey pulled off was about 10 days ago with the very small committee that he has to get behind all of this. The meeting that happened yesterday, announced this morning, was the one where the larger group came together and united. We know there were people protesting within the DUP. They were leaking left, right and centre over the last 10 days to try and scupper this from going through. That probably actually helped Jeffrey in the end. There's a paradox there, but that's how the DUP works. And again, I think congratulations to him. I mean, we're going to see the detail, of course, and it might be there's something in the detail that causes others to balk. I think it's unlikely. I think everybody, including the EU, want to see government back in Northern Ireland.
It's interesting, Sean, the way you describe it. It's almost as if Sir Geoffrey has not just been negotiating with the United Kingdom government, who've also had an eye to the EU, but also has been negotiating to some extent with his own party. It's almost like there's been Sir Geoffrey Donaldson, the hardliners within the DUP, the British government with an eye to the EU, with the Republic of Ireland as well. My goodness, so many moving parts in such a complex set of negotiations.
Yeah, politics in Northern Ireland is like that, though, the whole time. But having said that, think of Rishi Sunak right now. I mean, he's spending his entire time negotiating with the Conservative Party to remain leader. Keir Starmer effectively had that negotiation when he saw off the momentum movement within the Labour Party and clearly established himself as the man in his own right, but to a very large extent, this is new Labour once again. So what we're seeing here is party leaders having to negotiate seemingly on the outside, but they're constantly negotiating on the inside. And I think one of the things that makes Keir Starmer such a strong figure in politics right now in Britain is his negotiations effectively with the Labour Party are behind him. He leads the Labour Party. Rishi Sunak's problem is that he doesn't lead the Conservative Party. And what Jeffrey Donaldson has done in Northern Ireland today is effectively to establish himself as a very strong leader. He took on his party. They didn't want to go with him initially. He knew he couldn't get them there initially. That's why it's taken such a time. He's won a lot. And let's be clear, 3 billion is a lot of money to have won for Northern Ireland. But it's the price that the British government have decided should be paid in order to get government up and running again. That's the main detail of really what these negotiations have been about. He's won a good deal. Everybody in Northern Ireland will benefit from that deal, whatever party they vote for. Everybody will benefit from that. What remains now, of course, is if the government gets up and running, and here's some interesting thoughts for you, they've got to immediately confront the problem of public pay in Northern Ireland. How do they deal with that? They've got to negotiate the problems of the health service and the strikes and the pay issues within that. They've got to deal with some bread and butter issues. And I think, again, what you might observe here is, and it would be hard for the DUP to want to acknowledge this, but let me on their behalf do it. They've learnt a very painful lesson from the last elections in Northern Ireland 2 years ago. That lesson was this: Sinn Féin weren't conducting an election on Brexit and post-Brexit and the Constitution and devolution arrangements. Sinn Féin ran on a platform about the cost of living.
Yeah, they did.
And the DUP went into second place in those elections because they were talking about things that ordinary people who worry about putting food on the table for their families, their pay, their parents getting sick, they talked about the bread and butter issues that matter. And I think what's interesting here is that Jeffrey, as I suspect, said to his party, we're in danger of remaining a party that talks about principles, but all we'll do is be able to talk and not be in power. And that's where I think, the interesting parallels are with politics back here in Great Britain, because what Keir Starmer is saying is we need to talk about the issues that matter to people. And what the Conservative Party is doing is talking about things like Rwanda. And I have to say that Rwanda's jolly interesting, but bear in mind that Brexit was all about saying to people, you're going to get control back over your borders if you vote to leave the EU. Well, nearly 8 years on, what control have the Conservative Party demonstrated they have over our borders? None. They failed.
Well, on that note, Sean Woodward, of course, former Northern Ireland Secretary, former Labour Member of Parliament, really do appreciate your thoughts on this historic day in Northern Ireland. Thanks for your time.
Good stuff. So Rishi Sunak needs to take a leaf out of Sir Jeffrey Donaldson's
Although I have to say, Sean was singing the praises of Keir Starmer perhaps a little bit too highly. I don't know, maybe there's a lot of Northern Ireland in Keir Starmer. It's quite easy to win battles if you don't really declare your own position.
Well, I like that, how he drew those parallels between politics in Northern Ireland and over here as well. Very interesting. Let us know what you think about this all. GBviews at gbnews.com. But still to come.
There are growing fears that the Middle East crisis is escalating and could lead to wider conflict, dragging in the United Kingdom. This is Good Afternoon Britain, GB News, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christys Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christys Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News is Britain's news channel, and now you can support it. All you have to do is scan that QR code that's up on your screen right now, or you can go to gbnews.com/support and become a GB News member. You'll have fantastic benefits. We're also going to organise special events where you as GB News members can meet the presenters, the on-screen faces. Scan the QR code or go to gbnews.com/support. Thank you so much.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall?
Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
I'm Michelle Jubbery, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubber and Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQs live here on GB News. Every Wednesday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions when Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer go head-to-head in the House of Commons.
We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQs live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It is 24 minutes past 12. And this morning on the data releases that we see from government, the Office for National Statistics released something really rather extraordinary. The number by
One
which...
word for it.
The number by which the United Kingdom population will expand solely due to migration over the next decade.
Yes, so the ONS has essentially forecast that 92% of our population growth from 2021 to 2036 will be as a result of immigration. So, according to the ONS, now these are projections, OK? So they may not always be 100% real, they may not be 100% accurate, but they say that the population will increase by 6.1 million people by 2036. That's 12 years from now. Now, 6.1 million people, that is the population of Scotland.
It is indeed. It's just over the population of Scotland. It's equivalent to around 10% of the population of the country. And it comes at a time when we've seen a stuttering of infrastructure construction. We can't build roads, we can't build houses, we can't build energy production. All of these things have faced unprecedented obstruction at a time when we're seeing unprecedented population growth. These two things can't exist alongside each other forever.
Well, and crucially, it's not what people voted for. When they voted for the Conservatives, they voted for migration to go down. Yet we're going to see 6.1 million people, 92% of which will come from immigration added to the population. Do those sums add up for you? A 10% increase in the population by 2036. Is this something we should be happy about? Or is it a cause for great, great concern? And also, if the government promises they will reduce immigration, now I understand James Cleverly, the Home Secretary, is going to announce more measures, or at least update us on his measures on trying to reduce immigration. What can you say to these figures?
Well, I suppose we could do a back-of-the-napkin calculation. 2026 is 12 years from now. 2036, sorry, is 12 years from now. 6 million people. 6 million divided by 12, 500,000. 500,000 a year. 500,000 a year net migration for the next 12 years is what is implied the ONS is thinking about. That, of course, is lower than the migration that we saw last year and the year before, but far, far higher than the tens of thousands that were promised back in 2010.
Yeah, let us know what you make of this at home. Are you shocked by these figures? Are you not really surprised, considering the level of migration we've had over the recent years? I mean, let us know. gbviews@gbnews.com. Absolutely staggering projections from the Office for National Statistics there, 6.1 million. How can the Conservative government that campaigned on reducing migration explain these figures?
One caveat. These figures are not solely migration, they're majoritarily migration. So that back-of-the-napkin calculation, just a back-of-the-napkin calculation, there will, of course, be birth effects, recent migrant population, and, of course, a slight growth from
that includes coming from immigration, right? Well, let's move on. Let us know what you think about that, by the way, gbviews@gbnews.com, because fears continue to mount that the drone attack that killed 3 US soldiers in Jordan could escalate into a wider regional conflict. Rishi Sunak continues to urge Iran to de-escalate tensions in the Middle East.
This comes as both Britain and the United States announced a fresh wave of sanctions against Iranian officials and proxies in an attempt to tackle the domestic threat posed by the Iranian regime.
Yes, we're now joined by GB News political correspondent Catherine Forster, who's in Westminster for us. Yes, we heard from Rishi Sunak yesterday, didn't we, that warning Iran to de-escalate in the region. What's happened since?
Yes, that's right. And Lord Cameron, the Foreign Secretary, talking to a group of Arab ambassadors in Parliament yesterday, talking about the need ultimately for a two-state solution for Israel and for Palestine. Now, that's something that Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli PM, has made it very clear he's absolutely against. But Lord Cameron saying that the Palestinian people need a political horizon. They need something effectively to aim for, to hope for out of all this when the horrors end that are currently going on in Gaza, with the death toll estimated by Hamas health officials to be well over 25,000. So, yes, real fears over possible escalation following the deaths of these 3 US soldiers in this drone strike in Jordan. I think the Prime Minister will be very glad indeed that he has put David Cameron, the man who was Prime Minister when Rishi Sunak wasn't even an MP, as his Foreign Secretary, because it means that Rishi Sunak, to a large extent, is handing this over to him. And it really is a very big job. We've seen his representative in the House of Commons, Andrew Mitchell, taking questions from MPs this morning. Lord Cameron, meanwhile, is heading now to Oman. It's his 4th visit to the Middle East since he took the job just a couple of months ago. And he's talking now about possibly recognising a Palestinian state, officially doing that bilaterally and potentially along with the United Nations, to make it clear to Israel that they're saying, no, there's going to be no Palestinian state in the future, is really not going to wash, because without a two-state solution, Britain and the US feel they can't see any way really towards peace. So let's see what happens with that. But yes, real concerns over tensions in the Middle East, because of course this is escalating, isn't it? We've seen what's going on in the Red Sea, those Houthi attacks. Now, the West want to say that these are separate incidents, but people in the region make it very clear there is a link. These groups, Hamas, the Houthis, Hezbollah, also all backed by Iran. Iran really has its tentacles right across the region, and the West might want to de-escalate, but it's far from clear that Iran does.
Really, really concerning stuff. Catherine, just finally, what is the likelihood that we will see this sort of expansion, this spiral out of something that the West believes it can control into something that we very much cannot control? We've seen a number of times in the last century what starts as a small issue can expand and grow and drag in countries, and before we know it, we end in a very, very dark place indeed.
Yes, I didn't hear entirely what you said, Tom, but I think you were talking about the risks of escalation, which are forefront in the minds of everybody in the West. And that really, from the moment that we had those horrific terrorist atrocities, the slaughter of 1,200 innocent Israelis on October the 7th, that has been the big worry in the West, that this conflict, which began in Israel, in Gaza, is going to widen, as seems to be happening. And now, you know, there's been a number of attacks on American bases, but now we have seen the first American deaths. Now, President Biden has said that he will respond. We don't know exactly how. But, you know, meanwhile, Donald Trump is coming along and saying this is all happening because President Biden is weak. And even among military analysts, no clear agreement on exactly what to do.
Well, Catherine Foster, thank you so much for bringing us the very latest there on a deeply concerning situation in the Middle East from Downing Street.
Yes, thank you very much to Catherine. Now, coming up, the winter of discontent. Fresh strikes disrupt commuters up and down the countries. That's on our railways. We'll be looking at the economic impact after your headlines with Sam. This is Good Afternoon Britain.
Tom, Emily, thank you very much and good afternoon from the GB Newsroom. It's just gone 12:30. Our top story this hour. The Northern Ireland Secretary has hailed what he described as significant news after the DUP backed a deal to restore a power-sharing government. The party has refused to take part in government at Stormont for the past 700 days in protest against post-Brexit trade arrangements. They say they'll now back a deal if new legislation is passed in Parliament. Speaking a few moments ago, Chris Heaton-Harris says he'll publish the full plan tomorrow.
I'm pleased that the DUP have agreed to accept the package of measures that the UK government has put forward, and as a result they are ready to return to the Northern Ireland Assembly and nominate representatives to the Northern Ireland Executive. I can confirm that today I've updated the Cabinet on this significant development.
A man in his 30s who was armed with a crossbow has been shot dead by police in southeast London. Met Police say the man was trying to force his way into a building in Surrey Quays just before 5 o'clock this morning. He was reportedly armed with weapons and threatening to harm residents inside that address. Unarmed officers had tried to speak to the man, but were threatened when police marksmen arrived, and the man entering that building was then shot. The government says that new visa changes will make a tangible difference to migration figures. That comes as new figures from ONS project that immigration is due to add an extra 6.1 million people to the UK population by 2036. It means the total population in the UK is projected to hit 70 million by the middle of 2026. That's faster than the original forecast of 67 million. Passengers are facing more travel disruption as train drivers launch a fresh wave of walkouts in their long-running pay dispute. Train operators are urging passengers to only travel if absolutely necessary. The strikes were expected to be the first test of new legislation to enforce minimum service levels. And for the latest stories, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News.
Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christys Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christys Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
To the Commons now, where the MP for Rutland, Alicia Kearns, and indeed Foreign Affairs Select Committee Chairwoman is making a statement on the sale of the Telegraph.
But this is an urgent question, an opportunity for honourable members to make clear their concerns and views known, as much as it is for me to answer them. So I say, be heard loud and clear. Now, straight after this UQ, I shall be taking through the media bill and I shall be making the case for this legislation in broad terms. I shall argue that a free media, not interfered with by government or indeed governments, able to articulate and reflect a broad range of views, free to speak, free to create, able to project to the world what democracy, a plurality of views and debate truly mean, is something important, something that we should value, something that underpins what we mean in many respects by a free society. And of course we all know that. It's something we repeat, automaton-like, in a way that risks complacency. But as I watch the actions of authoritarian states during these times of turbulence, and as I see Western democracies in a knot of angst over our own values, and as I see our populations question if our values still matter from the safety of these shores, I'm reminded of the need to make the case again and again and again. So I cannot speak to this specific media ownership question, and I know that honourable members will understand that and help me keep within the tramlines that I have. But I can speak about media freedom, the need for media to be separate from political and government interference, the importance of a British voice domestically and internationally, the pride we can feel in media institutions like those in the Telegraph Media Group, some of which date back 2 centuries, and which drove changes in this nation as profound as the Great Reform Act, and whose writers to this day ask questions of all of us with a rare inquisitiveness and preoccupation with truth. And I can say, and I shall be finishing shortly, that I will be hearing the...
Sir, order. Please don't tell me what you're going to do. I'm in charge of the time. You're way over. I expect you to now finish.
And I can say, Mr. Speaker, and I apologise for over-speaking, but I will be listening to the points made in the broadest of terms, and I suspect may agree with many of them.
Speaker, for granting this important urgent question. The Minister does hit the nail on the head when she says this is about freedom from government interference, although it's quite something to start by knowing we will get no answer to any of our questions. We have a very proud tradition of a fiercely independent press in our country, and a press which holds us in this place to account, and a press which shines a light on misbehavings and misdoings both here and abroad. Yet we see a situation where a paper of record, the Daily Telegraph and the Spectator, the longest running magazine in the world and my personal podcast of choice, will be purchased by a foreign state. The concern here is not foreign ownership, it is foreign state ownership. And in this situation, you cannot separate sheikh and state. And these are our concerns. I worry when we look more broadly, we have allowed our media, critical national infrastructure for our democracy, to fall between the cracks. We have the Defending Democracy Task Force, which only looks at electoral concerns. We have the National Security Investment Act, which has 17 sectors, but none of which are the media. And therefore, we have no protections for this sort of situation. I have, therefore, 4 questions I'm hoping the Minister will at least attempt to answer, and I appreciate the restrictions in place. First, are there any examples around the world of a nation with differing media values, to be polite, acquiring the newspaper of another country? Secondly, will the government commit to a national security investigation into these purchases? 3, does the government not recognise its intervention in the UAE purchase of Vodafone sets a precedent that they can intervene here? And finally, will the government look to either extend the Defending Democracy Task Force or the 17 sectors under the NS&I sectors to make sure that we can protect our media, because this is something that will make us vulnerable, not for 5 years, not for 10 years, but for the rest of our lives, and we cannot afford our media to be undermined.
Minister.
Well, I thank the Honourable Lady for her questions. Now, as she is aware, a public interest intervention notice has been issued in this case. That means that I'm not able to speak to a number of the points that will be likely raised, but it does also mean that there are powers under the Enterprise Act that allow us to look into acquisitions of this nature, that allow us to look at issues of media freedom and of expression, that allow us, we also have powers in relation to the National Security Act, which the Cabinet Office has a role in, and will allow the Secretary of State for Culture to look at some of the questions that she raises. There will now be an investigation by the Competition and Markets Authority, but also Ofcom, and that will look into all of these questions in great detail. That will allow the Secretary of State to make a judgment on which action she next takes, and potentially a longer investigation whereby she would be able to then be offered a particular remedies or be able to prevent a transaction. But I cannot speculate as to which actions she would likely take at this stage.
Secretary of State, Thangun Dabana.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I'm frankly frustrated with the Minister. I want to thank her for her answer, but it frankly...
Well, there we go. Alicia Kearns asking an urgent question on that proposed sale of the Daily Telegraph. A question about whether it will be editorial independent, whether a publication in this country should be owned by a foreign state, particularly one that is a dictatorship.
And Alicia Kearns, the chairman of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, did thank Julia Lopez, the media minister, for seemingly agreeing with the intent behind her question, although I'm not sure we quite got any specific commitments from the government there on the further questions that were asked. It seems like the direction of travel from the government is against this sale. However, we haven't heard any detail in terms of whether or not they will step in to block it.
Yes, Alicia Kearns saying there is a precedent for the government to intervene on issues like this. She cited the case of Vodafone, the sale of Vodafone. The government intervened on that. She said, why can't they on this? Also, there should be a national security investigation into the sale of the Telegraph and the Spectator too. I believe Julia Lopez did say that the Competition and Marketing Authority will be looking into it. So there you go. What do you make of that? Should a UK publication ever be sold to UAE?
And is the CMA a body that is meant to be arm's length from government, really going to come to the same conclusions as the government? How influenced will it be? Big questions there.
Yes, indeed. Now, in other news, commuters across the country are facing rail disruption all this week as the main train drivers' union ASLEF stage fresh strikes and bans on overtime.
Yes, the Prime Minister has called the walkouts disappointing as train operators fail to enforce these new minimum service levels that the Strikes Minimum Service Levels Act, meaning that train operators are legally allowed to tell some striking workers to show up for work. They're legally allowed to enforce 40% service levels, but the train operators have chosen not to do so.
They're having none of it, are they? Well, joining us now is Liam Halligan, GB News Business and Economics Editor, of course, with On the Money. Liam, now we've been talking about the disruption to commuters. What impact will this be having on the economy?
Of course it will impact the economy, Emily. It's not just leisure travel, it's travel for work, it's business confidence. People overseas will look at this. Can't Britain even get the trains to run, let alone run on time? And this train strike, it's now entering its third calendar year, believe it or not. Let's just have a look at some of the details here. I've got a little on the money graphic because it's never the same without a graphic, is it? And here it comes. So we had the overtime ban start yesterday. The actual strike is from today, January the 30th, to Monday the 5th of February. It's a dispute between the ASLEF Train Drivers Union and 14 train operators in England. There might be one or two more as well. Now, ASLEF, the union, says some members have had no pay rise for 5 years. That's their beef. They're saying that ministers aren't engaging with the process. But ministers are saying, hang about, train drivers are paid on average 65 grand a year for a 35-hour week that only lasts 4 days. Nice work if you can get it. So look, this is a big headache for Rishi Sunak. I think the Prime Minister understandably spoke about this new legislation which the train operators could impose, as you say, Tom, to make sure that there's at least a 40% service on these train lines across England. But the train companies, they haven't got, quotes, the bottle, in the words of one minister I was just speaking to impose these legal restrictions on strike action. So it is a mess, and it's bad news for the government, of course, because it's generally the government that gets the blame. Labour have been practically silent on this. Some Labour backbenchers are saying, yes, of course, we support the strike action, but very little of that from the Labour front bench, of course, because they don't want to frighten the horses as we get into general election season.
Liam, can't the government compel these train operators to introduce these minimum service levels? Why isn't it happening?
You would think so, wouldn't you, Emily? Because that's what the law says. But the train operators, they operate independently. They get a lot of government subsidy, of course, indirectly, but they are independent operators. And it's, it may be that we're quite near to a resolution of this dispute. Fingers and toes crossed. It may be that ministers and the train operators feel that to impose this law would up the ante, would really ruin relations completely. But I, like you, am exasperated by these strikes, Emily, and you have to wonder if they've been softly for now into the third calendar year and the strike still isn't resolved. You have to ask, should they be changing tactics and playing a bit more hardball? I certainly think that there's very little public support. Opinion polls shows a lack of public support for these train strikes going ahead, not least because, whichever way you cut it, these train drivers are very well paid. Of course, ASLEF will say, Mick Lynch will say, but it isn't just about the train drivers, it's other support staff, other technical staff, maintenance staff who aren't as well paid as the heavily unionised, often long-established train drivers. But still, the train drivers are the kind of flagship employees, the ones who are refusing to come to work in the highest numbers. And it's more sort of New Year misery for people trying to make a living. And hey, tomorrow you got to hand in your tax return.
And a lot of those commuters are on far less than the train drivers are per year. But thank you very much for your time, Liam Halligan.
Absolutely
as
true.
Always, GB News economics and business editor with On the Money there. I mean, what's the point of having a law if you don't then impose it? And then and what's the point? I can't get my head around 65k a year, 4 days a week on average. Some earn much more than that. Do you have any sympathy?
It's more than the government pays trainee astronauts.
But it is the union's job, I guess, to try and drive the hardest bargain. But there you go.
But from trains to something a little bit more technologically impressive. Elon Musk has announced that the first patients to receive a groundbreaking brain implant from Neuralink is recovering well.
This is all a bit odd. The product, called telepathy, uses a robot to surgically place a computer chip in a region of the brain that controls movement.
Yes, Elon Musk says that the first goal is to enable people to control a phone or a computer just by thinking. He says that initial tests show promising signs of brain activity, meaning that patients with paralysis could one day overcome their conditions.
Not sure about this one. Joining us to discuss this breakthrough is applied futurist Tom Cheesewright. Tom, this sounds, well, slightly terrifying.
I certainly think a lot of people will be thinking this is something out of a sci-fi horror rather than reality. But this is a technology that's been a long time coming. We've been developing direct brain-computer interfaces for a long time, mostly for the sort of therapeutic reasons that are the initial goal, at least, of Elon Musk's Neuralink, to allow people who are perhaps quadriplegic to have direct control via their brains of initially a smartphone and maybe ultimately artificial limbs or a wheelchair.
It does seem fascinating how quickly this technology is moving on. I saw demonstrations perhaps a year or two ago of people playing a very simple Pong game just by thinking, moving sort of one line on a screen up and down. This seems like potentially there has been a breakthrough that means far more complex things can be controlled just by thinking.
Well, there's lots of different aspects to this technology. The initial attempts to interface with the brain used actually quite thick prongs almost that went into the brain, and they were quite solid, and so if the brain moved, they could potentially cause damage. One of the breakthroughs of the Neuralink technology is much, much thinner threads, which is why you need a robot to insert them. We're talking about something, this is a fraction of the diameter of a human hair, sort of 4 to 6 microns, whereas a human hair might be somewhere between 70 and 150. So much, much smaller than a human hair, and yet able to contain many, many sensors in each thread. That gives you a very rich amount of data coming out of that area of the brain that controls movement.
But is there potential for damage to the brain here? These are threads that are digging into your soft tissue.
Oh, look, absolutely. This is a dangerous procedure. And they're only going to be doing this on people who are volunteering at the moment because they've got a very good reason to volunteer and want to try this. Where I get more sceptical about the prospects for this. Well, quite possibly, but where I think it's actually only expenses. Looking at the proposal for the research trial, but where I'm a bit more sceptical perhaps is this is a consumer product, something we might all want in the future as an alternative to a smartphone. Having surgery every couple of years, every time you want to upgrade your smart brain or whatever we decide to call it, feels perhaps a little unlikely.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Tom Cheesewright, applied futurist. I wonder what Elon Musk, thank you for your time. I wonder what Elon Musk's game plan is. What's the goal? I do worry about the old evil scientists.
The goal is being able to beat AI. If you can't beat them, join them.
Yeah, you could put anything in your head, couldn't you? Just put a chip that makes you evil.
You could learn a language. Forget Duolingo, just insert a language into your brain and you're fluent.
Right, well, coming up, immigration will add 6 million people to the UK by 2036. Stay with us.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello again, it's Aidan McGibbon here from the Met Office with the GB News forecast. A fine Tuesday for most of us, cloud clearing the southeast, and that will be followed by sunny spells in many places. It's an area of low pressure that is pushing in the North Sea, which contains still some cloud cover across East Anglia and the southeast, some patchy rain as well. So we'll continue to see some light outbreaks of rain or drizzle across Norfolk, Suffolk and Essex. Staying grey here, but brighter skies elsewhere. Plenty of sunshine for the southwest, Wales, the Midlands into northern England, as well as eastern Scotland and Northern Ireland. Just a few showers into western Scotland, but elsewhere where we've got the sunshine, feeling pleasant enough with light winds and highs of 10 Celsius. Into the evening, we'll see the cloud thin and break across the southeast. That will allow temperatures to fall away. And with light winds, a few fog patches will form as well across some central and southern parts. Further north, cloud builds and it turns increasingly wet and windy, especially for the northwest of Scotland, where some heavy rain arrives by dawn. Now, the winds really pick up during tomorrow morning, with the risk across the northern half of the UK of 65-mile-per-hour wind gusts, and for the far north of Scotland, 85-mile-per-hour wind gusts. That could cause some real issues, and we've got the heavy rain pushing south across Scotland into Northern Ireland, Northern England and North Wales. So a blustery day for many of us, but mild.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christys Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christys Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall? Let's find out together. For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQs live here on GB News. Every Wednesday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions when Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer go head-to-head in the House of Commons.
We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQs live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News,
the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you. Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months. That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
to find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It is 1 o'clock on Tuesday, the 30th of January.
Population explosion. Immigration will contribute to over 6 million people to the UK by 2036, according to the latest figures from the ONS. That's equivalent to the entire population of Scotland, boosting the number of people in the UK by nearly 10%. Can Britain cope?
Shots fired. A man armed with a crossbow and threatening to harm residents has died after being shot by armed police in southeast London. Our reporter is on the scene.
back to work. Northern Ireland is to have a government again after 2 years of stalemate and abstention from the DUP, who quit power sharing over the Brexit deal. Without a government, public services have languished. Will workers now finally get a pay rise, and at what cost?
Yes, and we're going to be speaking to Sir Robert Buckland very soon indeed. I think we want to ask him, well, his view on these immigration stats coming from the ONS, or projections from the ONS, that's the Office for National Statistics, of course, that the population could increase by 6.1 million people by 2036. I wonder what he has to say, because
Indeed.
The government always talking about trying to get down net migration. They've got various proposals, but of course we've seen record numbers under this government.
But of course, Sir Robert Buckland is also chair of the Northern Ireland Committee, and this is a very crucial question. What exactly has the government agreed with the DUP to allow them to return to power sharing? We heard earlier from Chris Heaton-Harris, the Secretary of State, who said we're going to have to wait and see, that we're not going to get the details of the deal until perhaps tomorrow.
Yes, well, we've got all of that to come, so keep your views coming in, gbviews@gbnews.com. We will get to some very shortly, but let's first get your headlines.
Tom, Emily, thank you very much and good afternoon from the GB Newsroom. The headlines just after 1 o'clock. Well, our top story this hour, the Northern Ireland Secretary has hailed what he's described as significant news after the DUP backed a deal to restore a power-sharing government. The party has refused to take part in government at Stormont for more than 700 days in protest against post-Brexit trade arrangements. They say they'll now back a deal, though, if new legislation is passed in Parliament. Chris Heaton-Harris says he'll publish the full plan tomorrow.
I'm pleased that the DUP have agreed to accept the package of measures that the UK government has put forward, and as a result they are ready to return to the Northern Ireland Assembly and nominate representatives to the Northern Ireland Executive. I can confirm that today I've updated the Cabinet on this significant development.
Well, in the last hour or so, we've heard that the Attorney-General, Victoria Prentice, has ordered an inspection into the handling of the Nottingham stabbing case by the Crown Prosecution Service. It includes a review of the CPS's decision to accept Valdo Calaccane's guilty pleas of manslaughter based on diminished responsibility. Victoria Prentice says the prompt and thorough review is needed to address concerns raised by the families of the victims, Barnaby Webber, Grace O'Malley Kumar and Ian Coates. Passengers are facing more travel disruption as train drivers launch fresh walkouts in their long-running dispute over pay. Train operators have been urging passengers to only travel if absolutely necessary. Downing Street says it will consider if they can strengthen minimum service level rules after train operators opted not to use the new law during these recent strikes. ASLEF General Secretary Mick Whelan says the government are just trying to give up resolving the row.
It's been 5 years since some of my members have had a pay rise. We're not looking for a pay rise for the years, the pandemic years. 3 years ago, when inflation started going through the roof, like many other sectors, we asked for a pay rise. We then found out that the people, the privateers that we work for, had done a deal with the Westminster government not to give us a pay rise, and there's a move afoot to rip up our terms and conditions. We still went into negotiations of good faith, and they've behaved despicably.
But Housing Minister Lee Rowley says that the strikes are unnecessary.
When the unions do the right thing for their members, where they're working for their members, that's fine. When they go out on strike unnecessarily, and this rail strike is an unnecessary strike, in my view, that's not acceptable. It's impacting hard-working people all across the country. It's a good example of why the government is taking difficult decisions, why the union-backed Labour Party is refusing to do so, and why the government should stand firm on these instances.
The government says that new visa changes will make a tangible difference to migration figures. It comes as new figures from the ONS project that immigration is due to add an extra 6.1 million people to the UK population by 2036. It means the total population is predicted to hit 70 million by the middle of 2026. That's faster than the original forecast of 67 million. A man in his 30s who was armed with a crossbow has been shot dead by police in south-east London. Met Police officers said the man was trying to force his way into a building in Surrey Quays just before 5 o'clock this morning. He was reportedly armed with multiple weapons and threatened to harm residents inside the address. Unarmed officers had tried to speak to the man but were threatened. When police marksmen arrived, the man entering the building was then shot. In other news, a review of supermarket loyalty schemes is now underway to see whether some pricing may mislead or disadvantage shoppers. The Competition and Markets Authority is reviewing schemes including Tesco's Clubcard and Sainsbury's Nectar. The UK's antitrust regulator is looking into whether it's fair that cheaper prices are available only to members. The review is expected to be finished by the end of the year. Millions of people in England can now access and view their prescriptions on the NHS app. NHS England says each repeat prescription ordered on the app saves GPs 3 minutes and saves patients 18 minutes. Health Secretary Victoria Adkins says the move to digital will ease pressure on pharmacists and cut waiting times. Pakistan's former Prime Minister Imran Khan has been sentenced to 10 years in prison, and that comes after recent details have emerged that he has also been in prison since August this month. The former cricketer has already been in jail on corruption charges, which he says are politically motivated. His lawyer says they don't accept what they're calling an illegal verdict. That's the latest from the GB Newsroom for now. For more, we're on gbnews.com, and you can also get the latest stories by scanning the QR code on your screen. Now, though, it's back to Tom and Emily.
Well, welcome back. Now, a man in his 30s who was reportedly armed with a crossbow has been shot dead by armed police in south-east London.
The Metropolitan Police say a man was trying to force his way into a building in the early hours of this morning and was threatening to hurt the people inside.
Yes, GB News reporter Christina Curtis is in south-east London for us. She has the latest. Tell us, Christina, what exactly has happened as we know, and what steps will the police be taking now?
Hello, so as you can see, there's still a very large police presence here in this estate in Rotherhithe in south-east London. So what we've been told so far is that a man in his 30s at around 5 a.m. this morning was threatening to break into one of the properties and harm the residents inside. He then is alleged to have started threatening officers when they tried to talk to him. Armed police then came, and by this time it said that the man was inside the property, and it then happens that they shot the man. They did provide first aid, but he died at this scene. 2 people were also injured, suffered minor injuries inside the property. So we've been out and about speaking to residents today. As we said, you know, a really large police presence here still. There's a very large police cordon as well. So it's really sort of having an impact on those living here. And a lot of them say, you know, it's been a real shock to see what's happened. In fact, one resident we spoke to who didn't actually want to appear on camera, but she said that she heard 2 loud noises, which she now believes is the gunshots. But other residents just say, you know, it's a really safe community. So here's 2 we spoke to earlier.
I was just looking at the news, and it was the familiar background that I'm used to seeing every day, and it's seeing it on the front, not for the best reason, I think, as well. It's not that nice.
Yeah, because we know some of the people living here, and it's just a bit difficult to imagine that somebody that we actually know a bit closer is having to deal with this. And we just read that the man actually got inside the house, and I can't even imagine how you would function in a situation like that.
So the police watchdog, the Independent Office for Police Conduct, has launched an investigation which is standard for any fatal police shooting. They're now here on the scene doing their own investigation and say that they'll be gathering evidence. So we'll still remain here on the scene and provide you with any more detail that we get.
Christina Curtis, GB News reporter, thank you very much for bringing us the very latest there from that rather shocking scene in South London. Thank you.
Yes, so we are joined by Sir Robert Buckland, the former Justice Secretary and Conservative MP for South Swindon. Thank you very much indeed for coming into the studio to talk to us. Just your reaction to that story we've heard, absolutely shocking. A man with a crossbow allegedly threatening residents, shot dead by the police. What happens next? This is always controversial when the police shoot someone armed dead fatally. What happens next?
Well, it's a very difficult position for the police because initially they have to confirm reports of firearms or weaponry, and then the armed response team will come out and do the work they need to do. Every time there's a fatality, it has to be referred as a matter of course to the Independent Office of Police Complaints. That's happened in this case. That's routine. But put yourself in the position of police officers having to make very fine calls and fine judgments. Obviously, we don't know the full facts here, but these situations are difficult to judge. Mercifully, members of the public have not been injured or killed. And we've got to remember that at the end of the day, this person was armed and clearly posed a threat to innocent members of the public.
This all feeds into the feeling that Britain is becoming more dangerous. We've seen what appears to be a shocking rise in stabbings and violence. We had the reporting on the tragedy in Nottingham last week with the sentencing there. Are people safe on the streets of London?
Yes, they are. Overall crime is definitely reducing. Violent crime has been reducing over a generation. What is happening is that there is a focus on the use of knives, particularly related either to gang and drug stealing and modern-day slavery, or indeed loners who, for various reasons, as we know in the case of the Nottingham case, often mental health-related reasons, will arm themselves in a way that makes them very dangerous. So whilst these incidents are shocking and horrifying, and remind us of how dangerous some people can be, the overall trends of violence in this country have been down in the last 15 or so years.
It's interesting because I suppose we see through social media and the like, so it seems more visceral, it perhaps seems more real to us than just reading it in a newspaper. But clearly there is an issue in certain parts of London with certain weapons. I do want to move on, though, because we have learnt this morning a pretty shocking statistic from the ONS, expecting the population of the United Kingdom to grow by 6.6 million people. That's around 10%. It's more than the population of Scotland in the next 12 years. This will shock many people. It's quite a rapid pace of population growth, mainly driven by migration.
Yes, a projection, not a prediction. However, these are important if we are to plan ahead on our public services, schools, hospitals, all those important services that have huge pressures on them already. Now, I think a certain amount of population growth often shows a healthy and growing economy, but these numbers should concern us because at the same time that we have, let's face it, relied too much on immigration as a source of cheap labour, we've got a cohort of people in this country who aren't working. Now, some of those people, I think, with disabilities want to work, but we haven't allowed them to overcome their obstacles, and I'm doing that work on autism at the moment in particular. And I think that a combined approach of really empowering people to get into the world of work, not relying on immigration as a source of undercutting costs and being a source of cheap labour, is going to be the best way forward. It may well be these projections come down a bit, but I think it's better to have the honest reality that at the moment on current trends, we're looking at quite a substantial
I think the public feel lied to, though. They've been promised reductions in migration since the Conservatives were initially elected. And since then, migration seems to be only going up. The promise of tens and thousands seems very, very far away. You say, oh, we might see less than this. Well, that's not enough for the British public. They are not relaxed about this.
Well, I think the British
Our viewers
public
certainly aren't.
No, and but you know, I talk to many people on the doorstep about this issue year in, year out, and I have done for many, many years. I think where we have people coming to this country that bring a skill and actually enhance our economy, I think that's a good thing. Where you're relying on migration to undercut and, in effect, provide cheap labour, I don't think that's sustainable. I think it leads to huge pressures. Don't forget that for all the people coming in, we still have a large number of people leaving our country. I think that Britain inevitably, as one of the largest economies in the world, in a pretty stable and safe part of the world, it's going to be that sort of honeypot attraction to many people who want to come here for economic reasons, which is why I think the government is entirely right to try and make sure that whilst we, pulling up the drawbridge, pretending that we live in a castle isn't going to be the approach, we do have to tighten up and emphasise the point that we can no longer just rely on cheap labour from abroad if we're going to solve
I think the government have let people down time and time again on this issue, so I'm not sure there's any trust left when it comes to immigration.
Well, look, you make a fair point. I think the reality is that it's very difficult to predict, population movements. We dealt with free movement when we left the EU. That ended, so people couldn't just come here from the EU, and you've seen the numbers drop. But what we've seen then is a replacement, if you like, by non-EU nationals coming here. Many of
Not what people voted for, though, is it?
It's a reality, I'm
Control
afraid.
of our borders, and it doesn't appear like there is.
Well, the truth is, what we do now have in this sort of free movement is a control in the sense we can award visas. And, of course, we have huge shortages in social care and other types of occupation where we can't get enough people to work.
Isn't this the bizarre inconsistency? We've got very high migration, but also a labour shortage. And it seems very odd that we've had higher migration than ever, but you can't walk down a high street in any part of the country without seeing the local pub desperate for people to work there. I mean, what's going on? How do we square that circle?
About 1 million vacancies. I mean, that's a huge number. In many parts of our country, we have what would technically be regarded as full employment, and therefore we've had an inflationary effect on wages. And that's good in many ways. I want to see people having more money in their pockets, come payday. That's going to be good. And this year we're going to see more of that.
But does it mean that too many people are coming as dependents
and not working,
rather than as people who are actually working?
So here's the thing. I think that the government are absolutely right, for example, to deal with the dependent issue on postgraduate students. The numbers had soared from a couple of thousand to like 80 or 90,000 in a very short space of time. We just have to keep bearing down on those issues. My personal view is, I think, undergraduate students, should we be counting them in the immigration figures? I don't think we should. But that still leaves quite a few 100,000 people coming in here net every year. And therefore, instead of just looking at the headline numbers, we need to be asking the question, why? Why are they coming here? And what is it that we're trying to solve, rather than just taking this rather sort of sledgehammer or rather indiscriminate approach?
But students require housing, they often require health treatment, they often require a lot of resources, so surely they have to be in those figures.
No, I don't agree, because what we should be talking about with migration is people who are coming here on a permanent basis. Now, I think there are issues about some of the policing of all of this, frankly, and the way in which people disappear into, should we say, the grey area, sometimes referred to as the black market. We have a number of people working irregularly, a large number of people in this country working irregularly. I've got very strong views about how we should normalise that and actually bring them into the system so we can recognise who these people are. Because I want these people to pay tax and I want these people to pay for the public services that we provide.
Now, Rob, we don't have much time left, but I do want to touch on Northern Ireland. Of course, one of your other hats is being chairman of the Northern Ireland Committee. And this deal, £3 billion we know about, some laws that will be changed that we don't know about. It's almost this black box deal that we don't know the details of. What do you make of it?
Well, in the coming hours, we will know more, Tom. The Secretary of State, Chris Heaton-Harris, has announced just now that he will publish what we call a command paper. That's a government policy document tomorrow. I'm told it's going to run to about 90 pages, quite a substantial document. And in that will be the detail of what's happening with these so-called red and green lanes. It sounds like a customs declaration. That's what it is. So the red lanes are all about goods going to Southern Ireland, the Republic. The green lanes are about goods that are staying in the UK, and that's been where the admin problems have hit businesses. The DUP have been rightly raising these issues. Now it seems that a large number of their concerns have been met, which is good news. We need to see exactly how this is going to work, but I'm confident that now we can make progress.
So it could be the abolition of checks. For most goods going from the UK, or staying within the UK and not going on to the EU?
Yeah, well, we need to work out, because, of course, goods go from Great Britain to Northern Ireland, and then some of them come back because they're processed goods. There might be a difference there. We need to understand precisely what this means. But from an EU point of view, I cannot see how items coming back into GB from Northern Ireland affect the single market at all. And I think, if the EU have been consulted, which I think they have, then they should, I hope, be quite relaxed about internal matters that are properly for our United...
Potentially the abolition of, if you want to describe them as export checks, not really exporting, same country, but export checks from Northern Ireland to the UK, potentially a complete abolition of those on goods.
We need to see the detail. Sir Geoffrey has suggested that there will be a change that is meaningful. He's also talked about a change in our EU withdrawal law to prevent this sort of convergence issue that has concerned Northern Irish DUP politicians about their relationship with the EU. So it all sounds promising. I know there are some voices who are still say it's not enough, but I think now let's not allow the perfect to be the enemy of the good. Let's see that executive working, because there's a huge range of public service challenges that Northern Ireland has to address, and the people in Stormont are best placed to do that.
Well, fantastic to speak to you. Thank you very much. So Robert Buckland, former Justice Secretary, Conservative MP for South Swindon, and, of course, the chair of the Northern Ireland Affairs Committee. Thank you very much for your time.
Well, coming up, as French farmers stage the so-called siege of Paris, we'll be debating if net zero is impoverishing farmers across Europe. You're watching Good Afternoon Britain on GB News.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall?
Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christys Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christys Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News is Britain's news channel, and now you can support it. All you have to do is scan that QR code that's up on your screen right now, or you can go to gbnews.com/support and become a GB News member. You'll have fantastic benefits. We're also going to organise special events where you as GB News members can meet the presenters, the on-screen faces. Scan the QR code or go to gbnews.com/support. Thank you so much.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Put in your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Curse, on the Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians, and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. The Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show every Saturday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every Sunday from 11. Join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 25 minutes past 1 and farmers are blockading major roads across France in what's been dubbed as the Siege of Paris.
Yes, dramatic pictures. They're seeking to stop food deliveries to supermarkets as part of ongoing protests against falling incomes, increasing bureaucracy and, crucially, cheap imports.
So, how is the British farming industry affected by these same issues? And is net zero impoverishing farmers?
Well, OK, joining us now to debate this is dairy farmer Charles Godby and the research director at the Adam Smith Institute, Maxwell Marlowe. Charles, I'll start with you, as you are the dairy farmer. Do you empathise with what's going on in France? These farmers are absolutely furious. They think that the prices of their goods are essentially being undercut by supermarkets, by the likes of Aldi and Lidl.
Yes, I do empathise with them, and it just shows what a dire situation and the strength of feeling that's out there. Do I agree with the extreme lengths that they're going to? I don't think I do, no, but I can fully understand why they are doing what they are.
And Charles, do you think that the real concern here is this sort of hyper-capitalist importing of cheap food from overseas, but also from these cheap supermarkets that Emily mentioned? How hard does that make life for farmers?
I'll be honest, life is getting impossible. We've seen our input costs just spiral beyond control almost at times, and yet at the same time we're being demanded to by the supermarkets and larger retailers that we've got to produce for less and less. And we're seeing attacks almost from both sides. So yes, we're seeing our produce being undercut by cheap imports. Now, some may argue that that's a good thing, we're keeping the price of food down. For me, it's not good at all, because we are producing under regulations that demand that we have the highest animal welfare standards, we have the highest environmental and sustainability standards in the world, and that comes at a cost to us to produce to those standards. So when we're seeing produce come in and undercut us that don't meet those standards, it really is a kick in the teeth.
Maxwell, is
at the same time?
Maxwell, is it worth impoverishing farmers just to have cheaper food in our supermarkets?
Well, it's not really impoverishing farmers.
You've got to ask you.
Sorry, I'm just bringing in Maxwell here, Charles. Maxwell.
It's less about impoverishing farmers and more about providing a competitive deal for consumers. The great man himself, Adam Smith, who said, no, by means of glasses, hotbeds and hot walls, very good grapes can be raised in Scotland, but 9 times the price compared to France. We wouldn't suggest, growing coffee or wine or oranges here in the UK.
Well,
so
we have a lovely booming wine industry, Maxwell. Where have you been?
That is true, of course, in the south. But people still want to drink Merlot. They still want to drink Sauvignon Blanc, and a lot of the best stuff comes from abroad. Farmers need to be competing, and they're not at the moment. Yes, Charles is right about high standards, and those are expensive. But unfortunately, what we're seeing is a very uncompetitive industry at the teat of government, sucking up a lot of subsidy from the taxpayer. Whereas, consumers are paying the price, whether through their taxes or through, of course, higher food prices.
Well, hang on, Maxwell. We've been talking a lot about war, the prospect of an all-out war. Is it not vitally important that we have our own food supplies in this country and that we can be reasonably self-sufficient with something as important as food?
Of course it is, and nobody's arguing to abolish the farming industry, but they need to become more innovative. When you look at capital spending and productivity in the farming industry in the UK, it's some of the lowest in Europe, and we need to have a really serious conversation about that. especially following your previous segment about, labour shortages in the farming industry. It's really important that we have a good, sustainable industry in the UK, but you can do that in line with a lot of the really good free trading agreements that we should be going for. During the Second World War, for example, we imported a lot of food from the US. We didn't starve, we did have rationing, but that was a long time ago. We need to be renewing those free trade agreements and trying to get more food on the plates for Britain, whilst also increasing our own sustainability.
Charles, what about that point that you shouldn't fear foreign competition? Perhaps it should spur a greater level of efficiency in British farm output, because British farms are less efficient than, for example, New Zealand farms or Australian farms.
Well, I disagree. I don't think they are less efficient. We have some of the most efficient farming in the world here. But we're being held back, maybe to a certain degree, by the rules and regulations that are being enforced upon us. I'd like to go back about, let's look at the food security we have in this country. In the 1980s, we were almost 80% self-sufficient in the food we produce. Today, that's fallen by around about 25%. And we only have to see what happened during COVID, during the start of the Ukraine conflict, what happened to our just-in-time supply chain. We were caught with our trousers down. We saw empty supermarket shelves. And, that just started a whole snowballing of, people queuing for food and not being able to get it. And that's what led to the hyperinflation back then. And we also have to ask the question is, what is cheap food? I would argue that food in this country is far too cheap. We are the third cheapest, what we spend on food in relation to our average income in the world. So let's not blame
Charles,
food.
on that point, because a lot of people looking at their bills every month will want food to be as cheap as possible, but do you think that people, good British citizens, should give up the likes of Aldi and Lidl to help farmers?
No, not necessarily, but I think we need to, all of the supermarkets, they're all in competition with each other for getting footfall, and you only have to just look at the sort of profits that a lot of these larger retailers are making. And all we're asking really is for fairness in that supply chain. We don't want to see any one institution taking the cream off at the expense of other people and other industries.
Well, Charles,
so we have fair trade in bananas, in sugar, in coffee. Why do we not have fair trade in this country? Because if it's not fair trade, it's unfair trade.
Well, Charles, we started with you. We'll finish with Maxwell. Your response to those points?
We do have fair trade in this country. We have the whole point of fair trade is to remove slavery from from supply chains. I don't think we have much slavery in this country. And not to mention, the fair trade agreements that, were put in place are self-regulatory. So, the British farming industry is at most liberty to start its own fair trade agreements. Yes, we should have profitable supermarkets. We want supermarket buildings to be there. If we reference COVID, for example, the logistical supply chain rather than the farms were the ones in trouble because we had a once-in-a-century pandemic. We need to be really careful about how we talk about this. And, we didn't have hyperinflation. That was really down to the Bank of England rather than from cost-push inflation. So I think the farmers are wrong here. We need cheap imports for, to get food on tables and to nourish our people.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much indeed for that great debate. Maxwell Marlowe from the Adam Smith Institute and Charles Goby, who is a dairy farmer himself. Where do you stand on that one? GBViews at gbnews.com.
Well, coming up, we're discussing these shocking statistics from the ONS that say immigration is due to add an extra 6.1 million people to the population by 2036. That's to come after your headlines with Sam.
Tom, Emily, thank you very much and good afternoon from the GB Newsroom. The headlines just after 1:30. The Northern Ireland Secretary has hailed what he's described as significant news after the DUP backed the deal to restore a power-sharing government. The party has refused to take part in government at Stormont for more than 700 days in protest against post-Brexit trade arrangements. They say they'll now back a deal, though, if new legislation is passed in Parliament. Mary Lou MacDonald, the president of Sinn Féin, says it's time for the country to come together.
There has been a great sigh of relief, but also a sense of expectation now that all of us together, for the common good, put our shoulder to the wheel and get the best job done that we possibly can for every single person living here in the north. And of course, by extension, this is a great news story for all of Ireland. This is an important part of the governance structure on our island, and it is a very welcome moment that we are here.
The Attorney-General has ordered an inspection into the handling of the Nottingham stabbing case by the Crown Prosecution Service. It includes a review of the CPS's decision to accept Valdo Calakane's guilty pleas of manslaughter based on diminished responsibility. Victoria Prentice says the prompt and thorough review is needed to address concerns that were raised by the families of the victims, Barnaby Webber, Grace O'Malley-Kumar and Ian Coates. A man in his 30s who was armed with a crossbow has been shot dead by police in southeast London. Police officers said the man was trying to force his way into a building in Surrey Quays just before 5 o'clock this morning. He was reportedly armed with weapons and threatening to harm residents inside the address. Unarmed officers had tried to speak to the man but were then threatened themselves. When police marksmen arrived, the man entered a building on the property and was shot. And a monkey which had escaped from a wildlife park 2 days ago has been sighted as efforts continue to recapture him. Thermal imaging drones are being used to hunt for the Japanese macaque, which found a way out of its enclosure at Highlands Wildlife Park on Sunday. While not considered dangerous, authorities are advising against approaching the animal and they're encouraging any sightings to be reported. For the latest stories, you can sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen.
For a valuable legacy your family can own, gold coins will always shine bright. Rosalind Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.266 and €1.168. The price of gold is £1,605.89 per ounce, and the FTSE 100's currently at 7,674 points.
Rosalind Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christys Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christys Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News is Britain's news channel, and now you can support it. All you have to do is scan that QR code that's up on your screen right now, or you can go to gbnews.com/support and become a GB News member. You'll have fantastic benefits. We're also going to organise special events where you as GB News members can meet the presenters, the on-screen faces. Scan the QR code or go to gbnews.com/support. Thank you so much.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall?
Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
I'm Michelle Jubber, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubber and Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQs live here on GB News. Every Wednesday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions when Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer go head-to-head in the House of Commons.
We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQs live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
It's 1:40 in the afternoon. Now, a teenager has gone on trial accused of killing 4 migrants who died attempting to cross the Channel in a small boat.
Yes, the asylum seeker Ibrahima Bar denies the charges of 4 counts of manslaughter and 1 count of illegal entry to the UK.
Well, GB News reporter Ray Addison is at Canterbury Crown Court following the proceedings. Very interesting and shocking case here. What's happened in the court today?
Well, in his opening remarks this morning, prosecution KC Duncan Atkinson told the jury that in the early hours of Wednesday, the 14th of December 2022, Barr piloted a non-factory built inflatable small boat from the coast of Dunkirk, France, into the English Channel. Now, this boat was made of very low quality material, the prosecution said, and its base could actually not hold the weight of its some 43 estimated passengers, and that was double what it could safely have been expected to carry. Plus, add to that, there was only 30 life jackets available to whoever could grab them first. No flares, no radio, a distinct lack of safety equipment on board this boat. Now, the passengers that were on board to make that journey were from Afghanistan, Iran, Albania, other countries as well. Some were under the age of 18, and they paid as much as £8,000 to make that journey. Now, Barr, prosecution says, did not have to pay because he had agreed to pilot the vessel. Now, the jury heard that the boat quickly started taking on water, and within about 30 minutes, it had actually risen to the level of the passengers' knees in the boat, and people started to panic. The prosecution says that during the trial, the jury will hear from one survivor who will claim that Barr was driving the boat too fast and had ignored requests to turn back. One heard him say, although he does admit he thought he said it jokingly, "I will either take you there or kill you all." Now, eventually the boat did start to fold up. The bottom of the boat completely fell out, and passengers all ended up in the water. To their rescue came a small fishing boat. The RNLI came along as well, Border Force and Air Ambulance too. However, tragically, 4 of the passengers on that boat, at least 4, drowned. 39 were taken back to Dover. Now, the prosecution case is that Barr had accepted a duty of care by agreeing to be the pilot of the vessel. He was aware that the boat was overcrowded, unsafe, and then he was aware that it had become unseaworthy, Duncan Atkinson says. However, he continued going, and even when it was abundantly clear that there was an obvious and serious risk of death. Now, the trial is expected to last 4 to 5 weeks, and it's important to say that Barr has denied the charges.
Just such a tragic case, such a tragic case. Ray Addison, thank you so much for bringing us those details, and we'll, of course, be back with you as we learn more throughout the day.
Is that the first of its kind, that type of case? Have we seen that before in the courts?
I don't know.
Someone accused... Well, we'll find out for you. But we're joined in the studio by the former Labour MP Simon Janchuk and historian David Oldroyd Bolt. So why don't we start with those shocking statistics from the ONS, projections really, that say, Simon, that immigration will add 6.1 million people extra to the population by 2036. That's the equivalent of the population of Scotland.
Yeah, so I think we're going from 63 million currently to 73 million in just a couple of decades. I mean, it's completely unsustainable, and we are the public services can't cope as it is now. So they're certainly not going to be able to cope with further increases in the population. We are sleepwalking into disarray and disaster. That's the reality of it. And we're just not taking action. We have, and the solution is relatively simple. These figures estimate, I think, net migration at 300,000. It's way higher than that every year. So the real figures are probably going to be higher than what these projections are. We need to tackle immigration and radically reduce it. We need to pay social care workers a decent wage. And we need to just get more economically inactive people back into the labour market. That's the solution to this.
But David, do we not want a growing population? Is there not an imperative in a world where most countries are reaching a certain level of development? We can't stand alone as this rich country with a small population outstanding for very long. We will need a bigger population to compete. Isn't it a desirable thing to grow our own economy, to frankly grow our own power?
Yes, grow our own, not import it. The point is that for the past 25 years, this is not a new phenomenon, this explosion in population. In the past 25 years, there has been more migration to this country than there was between the Norman Conquest and the millennium. And we haven't done anything nearly enough to expand services, to expand housing particularly, in a way that would make this sustainable. So we've added about 10% of the population from 1997 to now. To do that again in the coming years, when we cannot build enough houses, the population lag, housing lag in London alone is 28% behind what it should be just to keep up with the current number of people, never mind those coming. To think that we're in any way capable, economically or structurally, infrastructurally, to build those extra houses, to expand services in the way we need to do is lunacy.
Simon, why do you think, you clearly feel very strongly about this issue, you'd like to see immigration radically reduced. Why are so few of our politicians visibly agitated by this in the same way as you? Because they promise reductions in immigration and all we see is increases.
Yeah, exactly. It puzzles me. It genuinely puzzles me. And it's become immigration has become an increasingly important issue in recent times. The public have had enough of this. And that's why we're seeing such a decline in support for the Conservatives, because they've been seen not to deliver on these issues. And it's been, at best, it's been exceptionally poor management. That's the reality. You had that conversation earlier with a Conservative MP about people who are coming into this country being able to bring relatives. That's been happening under a Conservative government. There is no logic to that policy whatsoever, and only now are they beginning to decide to tackle it. Why would they leave that? That's just one example.
It is, and I think many right-thinking people would think that it's odd to have a migration system so tipped towards dependence rather than productive entities who are going to, work in the economy, fill the labour shortage that we have. But even if we are to fill that labour shortage and we don't have dependents coming in, there is a huge demand for particularly low-paid work that, frankly, many Brits don't want to do. Is it reasonable to expect, for example, social care to continue at the level it is, at the price it is, if we radically reduce migration? Surely these prices will go up.
Yeah, they have to go up because social care workers have to be paid more. That's part of the solution. And as a country, I think what we should have also been doing is moving to a smarter economy, not relying on
But Simon, if those prices for social care go up, surely our taxes will have to go up too.
Well, taxes don't have to go up. It depends what you spend money on, doesn't it? And what we also suffer from is low productivity. So in lots of public services, productivity is exceptionally low. Council officers aren't doing enough, or, people working in the transport industry aren't doing enough compared to similar industries in other countries. So we have to get more bang for our buck. It doesn't mean you have to put taxes up necessarily.
Well, It's interesting, David, isn't it, or frustrating, whichever way you look at it, that when people voted for Brexit, for example, it is true that a lot of people saw that as being, in part, a referendum on mass immigration. That is true without a doubt. A lot of people saw it as that the economy would no longer be so dependent on overseas labour. Conservatives have absolutely failed to take advantage of that opportunity to sort of rework the economy, whereby it can be more sustainable with immigration.
Yeah, precisely. And I don't agree with Simon that there is any doubt about why this is the case. There's no puzzlement about it. Politicians simply have no idea how they are to reset the dependence of the last quarter century on low-paid labour as a way of suppressing wages because we don't grow the economy enough, because we don't have a productive enough economy. On social care, there is a really simple answer. Stop looking to other people to look after your parents and grandparents. Bring them back into the home. Do what so many other countries do so well around Europe and make the family the active unit in the economy.
Okay, David, but I take your point and I agree with you to some extent, but it always falls on the women.
Fine.
Always.
Yes,
Always.
that has been a historical paradigm.
They have to go out to work too.
That has been a historical... Well, which is in part down to the lack of housing, which makes it necessary to have two income providers to have a mortgage. These are not isolated questions. These are all interlinked questions of how our society and economy have failed over the past 25 years, partly by design and partly by default.
I think you put the nail on the head there when you talk about how we structure our societies. Potentially one of the reasons why people are reluctant to bring in older relatives is because we live in such small houses with so few spare rooms, because we're about 4 million homes per person on a per-person basis behind the average European country. These are not simple questions to fix. The Conservative government, or various shades of the Conservative government, over the last 14 years have tried 3 times to reform the planning system to build more houses. Firstly, Nick Boles tried to do it back in the coalition era. You'll remember those votes, Simon. And then we saw Boris Johnson try to do it with Robert Jenrick's proposed reforms, the planning white paper.
Yep.
Theresa May scuppered that, and several by-elections did too. And then Liz Truss tried to tentatively do things with these low-tax zones with decreased planning regulations to build more. She was, of course, turfed out too. Politicians have been trying to fix some of these problems, but they keep being stopped, and perhaps they keep being stopped by the voters.
I think that's the point. You cannot have both a desire for more housing and a desire to keep every single field in the country pristine. And it's not simply about green space as well. There is so much brownfield side, so much inner city area just fallow. Nothing being done with it. And why, for instance, are there 1960s car parks with Grade 2 listing, meaning you can't do anything with them? Knock them down and build houses. And this is the point. Not flats, not tiny little boxes in which you keep people, but build houses suitable for families and suitable for intergenerational living.
It is interesting. So many things point back to this issue, Simon, but ultimately it's something that politicians have failed at. Politicians of all parties have failed at for decades. Is it just too big an issue? Because it ties into this migration issue, it ties into the productivity in our economy. Frankly, the way in which we need to change things in this country to have this higher level of growth are just so profound.
Yes, it's about politicians having a vision, isn't it? And not just an isolated vision in relation to one policy, as you've been making the point. You know, immigration impacts on housing, architecture impacts on housing, brownfield sites, greenfield sites, absolutely. So it's a complex picture, but we need politicians who see the bigger picture and can deliver a vision. And in some ways, I think Boris was on that, going in that direction, and then got scuppered for various reasons. Perhaps unjustly, in fact. But you do need somebody who's got that bigger vision.
But he was ideologically very relaxed with high levels of migration. I think he fooled the public.
Do you think so? Yeah. Well, he wasn't tackling it enough as well. But nevertheless, we need politicians who've got a vision, who can create... And Blair was quite good at that. I'm not saying in terms of this particular issue, but in terms of providing that vision and trying to make government work...
And selling a sense of Britain.
Absolutely.
Does David,
that people bought into.
On the point of why a politician seemingly so relaxed, it does seem like it comes down to the Treasury, who see immigration in terms of a spreadsheet. And if you grow the economy, then GDP goes up. But the problem is that individual quality of life has been going down. GDP per capita has been going down. So the maths isn't mathing
I think one of the big problems was that the Conservative leadership after the 2010 election essentially accepted wholesale the Blair and Brown idea of Britain, and Boris Johnson is part of that.
It's been a consensus. Well, we'll have much, much more after these messages. Don't go anywhere.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello again, it's Aidan McGibbon here from the Met Office with the GB News forecast. Dry and bright for most of us today, but there are some areas of cloud around, and then it turns increasingly windy overnight as areas of low pressure once again pass close to the north of Scotland. At the moment, higher pressure to the south is bringing a pleasant afternoon to many areas. Decent spells of sunshine for Wales, the Midlands, northern England, and then as the sun goes down, those clear spells push southeastwards, so that by the end of the night, actually, there'll be a touch of frost in some parts of central and southern England and some fog patches. Otherwise, it turns increasingly cloudy towards the north and the west, and it turns increasingly windy by dawn, with heavy rain arriving into the north of Scotland, gales developing widely across northern parts of the UK, wind gusts of 65 miles an hour in places, and for the far north of Scotland, the risk of 85-mile-per-hour wind gusts during the morning and early afternoon. Now, the rain pushes south across Scotland, Northern Ireland and into northern England by the afternoon, followed by blustery showers. A very unsettled day to come in the north, but in the south, although it turns cloudier and breezier, actually it's largely dry and relatively mild. Now, the rain and the wind clear through for the start of Thursday. A fine day follows for many. There'll be some high cloud around, but otherwise, for the vast majority, it is drier before further unsettled weather arrives into Friday and the weekend, but it does stay very mild.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Every Sunday from 11. Join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christys Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christys Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm
not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Up in your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Curse, on this Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians, and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. This Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show every Saturday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Explosion, immigration. 1 million people to the UK by 2036. That's according to the latest figures from the ONS. That's the equivalent to the entire population of Scotland, boosting the number of people in the UK by nearly 10%. Can Britain cope?
Shots fired. A man armed with a crossbow and threatening to harm residents has died after being shot by armed police in southeast London. Our reporter is at the scene.
Still afloat, Rishi Sunak's proposed Rwanda asylum law has cleared its first major hurdle, with the House of Lords voting to allow the bill to move to the next stage. But it faces a bruising ride, as the Archbishop of Canterbury warned it is leading the nation down a damaging path.
We can't hear any of the news.
Good afternoon from the GB Newsroom. I'm Sam Francis. The headlines at 2 o'clock. The Northern Ireland Secretary has hailed what he's described as significant news after the DUP backed a deal to restore a power-sharing government. After more than 700 days protesting against post-Brexit trade arrangements, the party says they'll now back a deal if new legislation is passed in Parliament. Mary Lou MacDonald, president of Sinn Féin, says it's time for the country to come together. And a warning, the following clip does contain some flashing images.
There has been a great sigh of relief, but also a sense of expectation now that all of us together, for the common good, put our shoulder to the wheel and get the best job done that we possibly can for every single person living here in the north. And of course, by extension, this is a great news story for all of Ireland. This is an important part of the governance structure on our island, and it is a very welcome moment that we are here.
Northern Ireland Secretary Chris Heaton-Harris says he'll publish the full plan tomorrow.
I'm pleased that the DUP have agreed to accept the package of measures that the UK government has put forward, and as a result they are ready to return to the Northern Ireland Assembly and nominate representatives to the Northern Ireland Executive. I can confirm that today I've updated the Cabinet on this significant development.
In other news, the Attorney-General has ordered an inspection into the handling of the Nottingham stabbing case by the Crown Prosecution Service. This includes a review of the CPS's decision to accept Valdo Calcane's guilty pleas of manslaughter based on diminished responsibility. Victoria Prentice says the prompt and thorough review is needed to address concerns that were raised by the families of the victims. Barnaby Webber, Grace O'Malley-Kumar and Ian Coates. Passengers have been hit by more travel disruption as train drivers launched their fresh wave of walkouts in a long-running dispute over pay. Train operators have been urging passengers to only travel if absolutely necessary. Downing Street says it will consider if they can strengthen the minimum service level rules after train operators opted not to use the new law during strikes. ASLEF General Secretary Mick Whelan says the government are giving up trying to resolve the row.
It's been 5 years since some of my members have had a pay rise. We're not looking for a pay rise for the years, the pandemic years. 3 years ago, when inflation started going through the roof, like many other sectors, we asked for a pay rise. We then found out that the people, the privateers that we work for, had done a deal with the Westminster government not to give us a pay rise, and there's a move afoot to rip up our terms and conditions. We still went into negotiations in good faith, and they've behaved despicably.
The UK's economy is projected to grow at a slower rate than expected. That's over the next 2 years. The International Monetary Fund says the UK will be the second worst performer in the G7 this year, with just 0.6% growth. While the IMF says the UK economy is seeing some growth as inflation drops, it's warning that the ongoing attacks in the Red Sea could introduce new shocks to the global economy. The government says that new visa changes will make a tangible difference to migration figures, and that comes as new figures from the ONS project that immigration is due to add an extra 6.1 million people to the UK's population by 2036. It means the total population is projected to hit 70 million by the middle of 2026. That's faster than the original forecast of 67 million. A man in his 30s who was armed with a crossbow has been shot dead by police in southeast London. Metropolitan police officers said the man was trying to force his way into a building in Surrey Quays just before 5 a.m. He was reportedly armed with weapons and threatened to harm residents inside the address. Unarmed officers tried to speak to the man but were then threatened. When police marksmen arrived at the scene, the man entered a building on the property and was shot. A review of supermarket loyalty schemes is now underway to see whether some pricing may mislead or disadvantage shoppers. The Competition and Market Authority is reviewing schemes including Tesco's Clubcard and Sainsbury's Nectar. The UK's antitrust regulator is looking into whether it's fair that cheaper prices are available only to members of those schemes. The review is expected to be finished by the end of this year. And a monkey on the loose in Scotland has been sighted as efforts continue to recapture him. Thermal imaging drones are being used in the hunt for the Japanese macaque, which found its way out of its enclosure at the Highland Wildlife Park on Sunday. Well, while not considered dangerous, authorities are advising against approaching the animal, and they're encouraging anyone who may see the creature to report it. For the latest stories, sign up to the GB News alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen. Now, though, it's back to Tom and Emily.
Thanks, Sam. Now, Rishi Sunak's proposed Rwanda asylum law has cleared its first major hurdle, with the House of Lords voting to allow the bill to move to the next stage.
But it faces a bruising ride as the Archbishop of Canterbury warned it's leading the nation down a damaging path. He was one of a number of critical voices in the upper house last night.
Yes, there were many, but we're joined now by Conservative MP and Deputy Chairman of the European Research Group, Dame Andrea Jenkins. Andrea, thank you very much indeed for your time. Now, you are one of 11 Conservative MPs who voted against this bill. If you were in the House of Lords, how would you have voted last night?
The thing is, it's very difficult, isn't it? Because we don't want all these lefty amendments, which waters it down even more. So when it comes back to our House next week, or the week after in the Commons, then we have a difficult decision to make, because it could get through on the Labour votes because they want it to be completely watered down. And we want to strengthen it. So, you know, we've got a lot of work to do there in the background.
Fascinating. So you're saying, as someone who voted against the third reading of the bill in the Commons, that you might be persuaded to vote in favour of this bill to prevent the Labour Party almost taking charge of it?
Yes. Yeah, I mean, this is, I think I need to speak to the other 11. It's putting us in a difficult situation, you know, whether we abstain. But I think we need to use it as leverage to try and put pressure on the Prime Minister, because it's not strong enough. It's going to be completely watered down. We're going to be listening to the European Courts of Human Rights with the amendments, which we clearly don't want to do. So how can we vote in support of something like that? You know, we need to stop it, really, don't we? So it's that really difficult situation.
And Andrea, how is that task of putting pressure on the Prime Minister going? You, of course, put in your letter of no confidence 2 months ago, I think now. We also had Sir Simon Clarke writing a blistering piece in the Telegraph about how Rishi Sunak is not the man for the job. Yes, how's it going? Does Rishi Sunak still not have your support?
Oh, completely not. No, definitely not. But I think what's interesting at the moment is we're seeing different camps of the party. You know, I'm to the centre-right. We're seeing some of the lefties of the party, who I call the Lib Dems, who are doing their plotting. I mean, did you see today that Kem is part of this WhatsApp group to oust him as well? And don't forget, she really tried to push to oust Boris. So it seems like other camps are sort of doing the work for us, really.
So you're saying that Kemi Badenoch is someone that you would describe as being on the left of the Conservative Party?
Well, she's good on the wokey stuff, but I'd say look at her voting record. She voted for all 3 Theresa May's deals. She voted for more net zero, and she's known in Parliament by fellow MPs as a great pretender, because what you see is certainly not what you get with the rhetoric that she puts out there. But I think it's going to be a turning point again, a further one this week. I mean, with the figures that we're seeing today on the migration, I mean, that is an attack on British civilization as we know it. We cannot cope with that kind of level. Look at public services are already stretched. And can you imagine the cost of putting people in hotels? And I think we actually need to be pushing them back on France. Why are we paying millions of pounds a year to France when that's a safe country? We should be sending them back there.
Andrea, do you think that Kemi Badenoch is taking part in an evil plot to oust the Prime Minister and make herself the leader? She was voted the most popular, wasn't she, by Conservative Home?
Yeah, but if you actually look at that, that was only 500 members. That's not exactly a lot, is it? So, and they're saying not many voted for Boris, which I find that very hard to believe. I know in my own seat. I mean, look, Kemi was a plotter against Boris, let's not forget that. And she's not well thought of in Parliament, in all honesty. I mean, I've seen the way she spoke to, you know, these great stalwarts of our party, Bill Cash, on the select committees, the European scrutiny committees, and she talks to them and schools them like they're children. She's not that well thought of by MPs, in all honesty.
It's interesting, it almost sounds like the next leadership election is underway. There are different MPs, different caucuses with different preferred candidates. But frankly, how realistic is it that Rishi Sunak could be forced out and that there could be yet another leadership election? Not after Boris Johnson, after Liz Truss, after Rishi Sunak, a 4th Prime Minister this Parliament? Is that a serious contention of yours?
Yeah, look, I mean, look, it looks bonkers without a doubt. However, you know, what chance have we got now? This is last chance saloon. I think we need to get a new leader. One, what's centre-right, because that's what the members are. And the members got to choose this time. They shouldn't have foisted on them like we did with Theresa May, like we have done with Rishi. We need a centre-right leader who brings true Conservative policies. And then, once they've selected one, obviously go into an election. We're in election year anyway, so let them set the stall out. And we're not going to win with Rishi, unfortunately. The polls are demonstrating that.
Andrea, I appreciate you have very strong views, but aren't you making it more likely that there will be a Labour government? I mean, talking about Kemi Badenoch, for example, so negatively, has she not been effective as a minister? Does all this sort of infighting, it doesn't look too appealing?
Look, I'm a straight Yorkshire woman. If I dislike somebody, or if I think someone's incompetent or they're not doing their job, or if I don't think they deserve to be Prime Minister, I'll say it, of whichever party. And I think there's far better candidates there. She only got elected in 2017. There's far more experienced people there who could be in the running if, you know, if the Prime Minister steps down.
Are you up for the job, Andrea? Andrea, are you up for the job?
No, look, I'm not that delusional. I'd get 1 vote from MPs and that'd be myself. So I'm not delusional. I just want a true Conservative leader in there.
Are you on Team Braverman?
Look, Rishi is not effective. We are so behind in the polls. Is not cutting through. I gave him a chance, especially with him saying he was going to roll back on net zero. Because I want to just ditch net zero personally myself. Look at the immigration. I mean, I think we need to come out really strong on this. And let's face it, Trump said he'll build a wall. What's the equivalent we can do in Britain? We need to be really strong and deliver for the British public.
Give us a name of who you'd like to see as the next leader of the Conservative Party then. Top 1.
Well, I want to see. I want to see the right unite, because let's face it, there's only about a third of us on the centre right in the parliamentary party, so we would need to unite behind one candidate. So I'd like to see, well, either Pretty, Kemi or Suella. One of those threes, I'll be completely happy with.
Oh, so Kemi's back in the mix.
Interesting stuff, Andrea.
Oh, not Kemi. Sorry, no, sorry. Pretty, Jacob or Suella.
I was a bit surprised there. I was a bit surprised.
Not Kemi.
Andrea, it's been a fascinating conversation, but it does reveal that there is a huge amount of division within the Conservative Party right now. The Labour Party
but
will be
within
delighted
Labour. I mean, look what's going on with
what
Labour.
You're saying.
No, but look what's going on with Labour. I mean, with the Corbynistas. I mean, with the signing the Holocaust Memorial Book. I mean, that was abhorrent, wasn't it? What she did, the Labour MP. So there's divisions in both party. But seriously, this is Lance Chancellor. I'm fighting to save our party, to elect a leader who will actually vote. I mean, look at the Telegraph polling. What was in
it was pretty dire.
Telegraph. It said that. Yeah, but people would come back if we had a true Conservative leader. And so that's, to me, that's our only chance now.
Well, thank you very much. Really appreciate your time. Dame Andrea Jenkins there, Chairman of the European Research Group. And, of course, the Conservative... Deputy Chairman, excuse me. Conservative MP, of course.
Yes, really interesting stuff there. And we're going to be speaking to our political editor in just a moment, because this is a fascinating question for Rishi Sunak. He's got these different caucuses within his party, and to some extent the question is, does he want to accommodate these caucuses, or does he want to fight them? And perhaps this is a decision that he should have taken a bit earlier in his premiership.
I'm not sure he's doing either, really. Just sort of ignoring, hoping everything will be OK. What do you think?
I don't know. I think that to some extent he has been trying to follow what some of these groups have been saying, but he can never go as far as what these groups would like. So perhaps in Rishi Sunak's ideal world, he would not have been talking about the small boats crisis for the last 12 months.
No.
But he's almost been forced into this position, and perhaps if he had only been talking about the economy, he might be in a more consistent position.
Well, then he should have stuck with being Chancellor, shouldn't he, then?
Well, it's an interesting point.
If he prefers talking about the economy and AI, then, yeah.
But again and again, we do see that people do have their economic concerns as their top issue. Migration, of course, a high issue. But if anything, the Prime Minister talking so much and pinning so much parliamentary time on stopping the boats has been turning people's eyes to parties like Reform, which have now been rising in the polls. I wonder if it's been a counterproductive strategy for him.
Not sure Kemi Badenoch would like to get stuck in a lift with Andrea Jenkins.
That was fascinating. That was absolutely fascinating.
Strong words, eh?
It's almost as if the next leadership election, which probably won't happen until after the general election, has already been going on.
I think it's going to be vicious, if indeed there is one. Do we have Christopher Hope now, our political editor? Christopher, thank you very much for joining us. Listening to our interview there with Andrea Jenkins, quite revealing, but it doesn't help Rishi Sunak.
No, I don't think so. I mean, Andrea Jenkins, yes, she's keen to be supportive where she can, but all everyone's talking about right now over in Parliament where I've been is the Rwanda bill, and next week we're going to see the shape of these amendments and the votes in the House of Lords the following week on the 12th and 14th of February. So and there's concern, even amongst the peers I've been speaking to, is what if this doesn't work? Because what's happening at the moment is they've got this model, to break this model for the people traffickers, but people are coming across the channel and some are dying, and that's not putting them off. So how can this work is the concern. But the government's gone all in on this plan, and if they can get this over the line, maybe on the statute book by the end of April for the first flights taking off in May, that will restore morale in what will be a key month in May with the local elections.
Chris, we heard last night so much criticism from so many Lords. The Lib Dems tried to block the bill in its entirety.
Yep.
The Labour Party said, we won't block this bill at this stage, we will just amend it. Now, that is going to protract this process of passage through Parliament by quite a degree. It's not realistic that these flights are going to get off this side of the summer, is it?
I think it is possibly realistic. I mean, what we're looking at is a thing called ping pong, which I know you and Emily know about, Tom, but this is exchanges between the House of Commons and House of Lords. Lord Liz Vane, formerly Robert Rogers, the former clerk of the House of Commons, very respected expert on this field, he talked of seven different exchanges back with a law and order bill back in 2007 or so. So it could go back and forth, but it should get through because of the scale of the majority in the House of Commons, second and third reading of 40 or so MPs, and also the Salisbury Convention, which means that if it's in a manifesto, means it should go through the Lords. That doesn't apply, but I don't think the Lords will want to shut it down. It will come to a crucial vote at third reading after it's been through various iterations of being changed and strengthened as it goes between the Commons and Lords, and that's the point when the peers could sink it. I don't think there's the will for that to happen. But as Lord Liz Vane said last night, he thinks it shouldn't be seen as a Commons versus Lords issue, but a Parliament versus government issue, and that's where we're going with it.
And that's a clever sort of framing to say we're asserting the sovereignty of Parliament. It's Parliament that's sovereign, not the government that's sovereign. Therefore, he can sort of almost endorse Lords' rebellions against how he would say the government rather than Parliament.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly. I should... Well, I was just going to say before that, today, the day is about net migration, and the Home Secretary James Cleverly setting out plans to cut net migration, which for our listeners and viewers is a far bigger number. Maybe 300,000 could come off that 744,000 who came here last year if they get it right. So yes, illegal migration is a problem. It's around 30,000 a year, but net migration is 10 times that in terms of what they want to get rid to stop coming here, and that could have a far bigger impact on our viewers and listeners.
Yes, indeed. Well, thank you very much indeed, Christopher Hope, our political editor there live from Westminster.
Indeed, really, really fascinating, the debates between the Lords, the Commons and the government, but also, I think, some news that we uncovered with our interview with Andrea Jenkins, the fact that some of those 11 MPs who voted against the government on Rwanda, they might well end up supporting the government to strip out some of those Lords' amendments. Really, really fascinating. I think that's the first time that's been said.
Funny how these things go. Anyway, moving to some pretty horrific news. A man in his 30s who was reportedly armed with a crossbow has been shot dead by armed police in south-east London.
The Metropolitan Police say that the man was trying to force his way into a building in the early hours and was threatening to hurt people inside.
GB News reporter Christina Curtis is in south-east London with the latest. Christina, the police will be investigating this incident internally and, of course, the case itself.
Yes, so I'm here in Rotherhithe in south-east London, and I don't know if you can see behind me, but there's still a huge amount of police activity after a man was shot dead by officers early this morning. So what we know so far is that the Met Police were called at around sort of 5 a.m. this morning after reports that a man with a crossbow was trying to enter a property and threatening the people inside. So unarmed officers attended the scene first. The man is then alleged to have threatened them. By the time they called for backup and armed police officers arrived, it said that the man was inside the property. Now, what we know is that police shot the man. They did provide first aid at the time, but he did die on the scene. And we know that 2 people inside the property were also injured. Now, we have been here for a few hours speaking to residents around. Like I said, there is a lot of police activity. There's quite a large police cordon as well, so it's really impacting the residents, some of whom, you know, hadn't even known what was going on. But a lot of them said they were shocked. Some of them had heard. One lady we spoke to, she didn't want to appear on camera, but she said she heard 2 loud bashing noises, as she described it, and then obviously a lot of shouting. But most of the feel around here is a real shock that this has happened in their community. This is what 2 people we spoke to earlier said.
I was just looking at the news, and it was the familiar background that I'm used to seeing every day, and it's seeing it on not for the best reason, I think, as well. It's not that nice.
Yeah, because we know some of the people living here, and it's just a bit difficult to imagine that somebody that we actually know a bit closer is having to deal with this. And we just read that the man actually got inside the house, and I can't even imagine how you would function in a situation like that.
Now, as you said, Emily, there has been an independent investigation, and that's by the watchdog, the Independent Office for Police Conduct. So what we know is that they have offices here and will be continuing to investigate.
Christina Curtis, thank you so much for bringing us that very latest from on the ground. Of course, we'll be sticking with this story and this investigation as more is uncovered.
Yes, but coming up, we will be live in Windsor. Why? Because King Charles and the Princess of Wales return home following their time in hospital. Stay with us. See you shortly.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christys Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christys Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall? Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQs live here on GB News. Every Wednesday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions when Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer go head-to-head in the House of Commons.
We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQs live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News,
the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you. Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months. That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Well, it's 2:27. King Charles and the Princess of Wales have both returned home. They returned home yesterday after their time in the hospital post-surgery.
The King was seen smiling as he left the premises with the Queen after 3 nights of medical care following his operation.
Yes, so Kensington Palace said the Princess is making good progress as she returned to Windsor, so that's good news.
And GB News royal correspondent Cameron Walker joins us now from Windsor. Cameron, this has been a tricky time for the royal family. So many senior figures undergoing hospital-level care. Are things now back on the road to recovery?
Yeah, it certainly has been a struggle, Tom, and if anything, it has highlighted the fragility of this slimmed-down monarchy, which we've spoken so much about over the last few years. But as you say, they are both back home, both the King and the Princess of Wales. We spoke when that news broke yesterday, didn't we, about the Princess of Wales. I understand that her children, Prince George, Princess Charlotte and Prince Louis, did not actually visit her in hospital, which means presumably the first time they saw their mother in person in nearly 2 weeks was when they returned home from school to Adelaide Cottage in Windsor, close to where I am now, where the Princess is expected to recuperate for 3 months. It's a long recovery ahead. She's not expected to be seen in public before Easter. It was very much a private exit from the hospital as well, in contrast to His Majesty the King, who chose a very public exit, alongside Queen Camilla, who was very happy to smile and wave to the jubilant crowds who had gathered outside the London Clinic in the centre of the capital yesterday. Earlier on, I spoke to some local residents around the Windsor area, and this is what they said.
Horrible being in hospital, as I know with my own children, so I'm glad she's home.
Wish you all the best and hope you're feeling better soon. Honestly, lots of love from all of us, really.
Well, I'm just very happy that they are back from the hospital. I wish them health and to do not be in hospital again.
A lot of people we hear have been saying nasty things online, which I think is terrible. So let Kate know we're thinking of her.
Yeah, we wish them well.
Wish them both well.
So lots of love there for the royal family, and perhaps it's a positive step as we look forward to the rest of the year.
And have we heard anything from Prince Harry and Meghan regarding the royal family's health, regarding King Charles's health? I'm reading that there may be some issues at the Archewell production company. They've got lots else on, it seems.
Yes, so Bennett Levine, he is the manager of Archewell Productions, and that's Prince Harry and Meghan's company, who've made that the Netflix documentary that we had at the beginning of 2022, documenting their life as they left the working royal family. And he has now left Archewell Productions after 2 years serving as manager. He had a junior position before that. He's gone to a rival company in Los Angeles. Some are dubbing it as a bit of a blow for Harry and Meghan. He is thought to be the 17th member of staff working for Harry and Meghan who have left their service since Harry and Meghan were married in the building behind me. Now, it could be a perfectly innocent reason as to why Bennett has decided to leave. It could just be that he saw the career opportunity, as many people do, and decided to, progress his career. Or was he jumping a sinking ship? If you remember, the Spotify deal that Harry and Meghan had was cut prematurely after one series of Meghan's Spotify podcast Archetypes and one holiday special. The Netflix deal is up for renewal in 2025. There's some speculation that the millions of pounds is not going to be renewed for a longer period. And we saw, of course, Harry and Meghan cozying up to the boss of Paramount Pictures on that red carpet in Jamaica last week. So lots of speculation as to why Bennett left, but nonetheless dubbed as a blow by some.
17 individuals leaving the employ of Harry and Meghan does seem like a bit of an exodus, really. But my goodness me. Cameron Walker, thank you very much.
That's in a few years, though, to be fair.
That is over a projected period of time. But Cameron Walker, thank you very much for bringing us the very latest there from Windsor.
Do you know what? As some people say we're too harsh on Harry and Meghan sometimes, and I do genuinely wish them well. But it would be nice to hear from them on King Charles, you know?
Yes.
Just to say, you know, there's been this outpouring of love towards the princess and towards King Charles from the British public. It's a shame we don't hear the same from them. But perhaps they don't wish to make public statements. I don't know.
I think a lot of them just want to, the tricky thing with Harry and Meghan, as always has been they don't want to be royals. They don't want to be senior members of the royal family. They don't want to be doing all of those duties. But on the other hand, they want to remain the Duke and the Duchess of Sussex.
They want the titles,
They want the titles. They wanted the fairy tale wedding. They wanted all of the nice bits with none of the duty. And I think that's what grinds people a bit of the wrong way.
Well, let's hope everyone finds peace. But coming up, should we ban agricultural imports to protect British farming? That's to come after your headlines with Sam.
Tom, Emily, thank you very much and good afternoon from the GB Newsroom. It's just gone 2:30, the headlines. The Northern Ireland Secretary has hailed what he's described as significant news after the DUP and the Unionist Party agreed a deal aimed at addressing concerns over post-Brexit trade barriers. Christys Harris has made it clear the government will deliver on its end of the deal. The DUP says they'll back the deal if new legislation is passed in Parliament. The Attorney-General has ordered an inspection into the handling of the Nottingham stabbing case by the Crown Prosecution Service. It includes a review of the CPS's decision to accept Valdo Calaccane's guilty pleas of manslaughter based on diminished responsibility. Victoria Prentice says the prompt and thorough review is needed to address concerns raised by the families of the victims. Barnaby Webber, Grace O'Malley-Kumar and Ian Coates. Passengers have faced yet more travel disruption as train drivers launched their fresh wave of walkouts in a long-running dispute over pay. Train operators have been urging passengers to only travel if absolutely necessary. Downing Street says it will consider if they can strengthen minimum service level rules after train operators opted not to use the new laws during the current strikes. ASLEF's General Secretary Mick Whelan says the government are just giving up trying to resolve the row. And a review of supermarket loyalty schemes is now underway to see whether some pricing may mislead or disadvantage shoppers. The Competition and Markets Authority is reviewing schemes including Tesco's Clubcard and Sainsbury's Nectar. The UK's antitrust regulator is looking into whether it's fair that cheaper prices are available only to members of those schemes. The review is expected to be finished by the end of this year. And for the latest on those stories, sign up to the GB News alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen.
(2024), a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall?
Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christys Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christys Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News is Britain's news channel, and now you can support it. All you have to do is scan that QR code that's up on your screen right now, or you can go to gbnews.com/support and become a GB News member. You'll have fantastic benefits. We're also going to organise special events where you as GB News members can meet the presenters, the on-screen faces. Scan the QR code or go to gbnews.com/support. Thank you so much.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Put your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Curse, on the Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians, and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. The Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show every Saturday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 21 minutes to 3, and here's something to look forward to later on GB News. Former Defence Secretary, current Leader of the House of Commons, and one-time leadership candidate for Prime Minister, Penny Mordaunt, has been speaking to our political editor, Christopher Hope. This is what she said when Chris asked her if, as a Royal Navy reservist, she'd be ready to fight if called up.
Look, I have signed up to do this in the past. I have to say, Chris, if they're calling on me at any point, we are really in trouble. But look, in all seriousness, we need to be a resilient nation, and that doesn't mean stepping up to pick up a rifle. What it means is that on anything that might happen to us in the future, we want our communities to be able to respond to that. When I rewrote this nation's resilience strategy, standing up a civil defence force to be able to deal with some of the things that we currently ask our armed forces to do was part of that suggestion, and we can take pressure off our armed forces by becoming more resilient ourselves, and that is something important that we should do. You have been in this office before covering my campaign to build 3 new ships, assets, civilian assets, but for the government to have call on if they need to. That could take pressure off our fleet, our Navy. So these are the sorts of things we should be looking at doing.
Well, there we go. The big question of the week, really, isn't it? And last week, would you fight for this country if you were called upon? You can watch the whole interview on the Martin Dobney Show at about 4 o'clock, so stay tuned for that. Now, lots of you have been getting in touch. We were discussing earlier, we had a bit of a ding-dong, a bit of a debate on essentially whether we take farmers for granted, whether we should stop shopping at Aldi and Lidl because they're undercutting British farmers and paying them not enough for their produce, essentially. Now, a lot of you have got in touch to say, I love Aldi and Lidl, I wouldn't stop shopping there. Farmers should make products cheaper if they don't like it. Paul, for example, says Aldi is the best store in the UK, and he wrote it in capital letters to prove it.
Well, there you go. Jenny says, we are not looking at after our farming industry. Many of our farmers go out of business. They just can't make ends meet. They're obviously not fairly treated. But Duncan
also says we don't have fair competition in our food industry. There are thousands of small farmers working phenomenal hours. Bring back the marketing boards to restore good wages and profits so farmers can invest and become more efficient. So I think we need to make it easier for farmers. Of course we do, but I do think it's a good thing that we have competition driving down prices. Otherwise, your shopping basket would cost a hell of a lot more.
Shall we expand this conversation? Yes. Because we're delighted to be joined by our panel. Still with us in the studio is the former Labour MP Simon Danczuk and the historian David Aldroyd-Bolt. And David, it's fascinating looking at these farmers' protests. We saw some in the Netherlands, we saw some in Germany, we're seeing them in France now. Perhaps it's only a matter of time before we see them in the United Kingdom. But I suppose there's different things that these various groups are asking for. Some are saying, lighten the load off us, take off this regulation, let us do our jobs. Others are saying, block foreign imports so that we can be protected. I suppose there's different ways in which you can respond to protests like this.
Yeah, and one of them would be to impose massive controls and make people's food much more expensive at a time when people are struggling to eat and to provide for their families. I'd suggest that's not the way to go. The history of British politics over the last 200 years is in large part the history of the debate between free trade and protectionism. But for those who are saying we need to protect our farmers, I would point out that the British now pay the lowest as a proportion of their income for food in Europe, and that's because we have free trade. Would we like to return to the situation at the beginning of Queen Victoria's reign, where you could expect to spend 50 to 60% of your income just paying for bread when they had controls? Or would we like it now, where you can reasonably expect to go to a shop and, depending on the quality of the bread, buy a loaf for anywhere from 60 pence to a couple of pounds? I would suggest that the choice should be the consumers. It should not be imposed by marketing boards or governments. It should not be imposed in a way to protect an industry that should be protecting itself. Diversification of free trade are the way for farmers to make money, not imposing protections that makes food unaffordable for the people of this country.
Well, Simon, isn't also the issue, though, and the farmers in Paris who are... Well, they're blocking roads into the capital there.
No one protests like the French.
Absolutely dramatic scenes, people sleeping on the sides of the road, farmers sleeping on the side of the road, wrapped in haystacks. It's quite something. They really are aggressively protesting this. And it's not just about banning imports or making it being more protectionist. There are other issues, so regulations on farmers, making it more difficult for them to make a profit, the burden of bureaucracy, the burden of net zero coming from the European Union too. So it's about a lot more than them just saying, oh, we don't want to import food from elsewhere.
Yeah, I think that's right, and I think some of the solution is around reducing regulation and reducing bureaucracy for farmers so that they can compete more fairly. We were always particularly good when we were in the European Union at following the European Union rules to the letter, where other countries were much more relaxed about it. And we do have that sort of culture within the United Kingdom. So I think government could do much more to make it easier for farmers in the UK to do business, to grow, diversify, to be able to make a greater profit. Like many of your listeners and viewers, I'm also an Aldi fan. I love shopping at Aldi.
What's wrong with Lidl?
Well, I know, I Lidl as well. But the supermarkets generally have been making excessive profits, ridiculously high profits, particularly since the pandemic. And it does feel a little bit like we need to regulate the supermarkets a little bit more and regulate the farmers a little bit less. I think that's the solution. That's the message that politicians need to hear.
What do you say to that, David, that we've seen supermarkets potentially making too much profit?
They wouldn't be making profit if people didn't want to buy the things they had to offer at prices they were willing to pay. This is a sign of supermarket success. It's a sign that they're doing their job properly. And their job is to provide a valuable service, one that people want to use. They're doing that. Think how much more expensive groceries would be in this country did we not have Tesco, Asda, Sainsbury's, the big three. And
but hang on, David, if the farmers are complaining that they're being essentially impoverished by supermarkets not paying them enough for their produce and that it could put them out of business, isn't that a matter of national security? Almost having a level of food security. If they're selling milk to a supermarket and they can barely break even, that's not a good state of affairs, is it? Or do we not care?
I think you have to take a rather political and hard-hearted view of this. People cannot afford to heat their homes, to buy sufficient food all at the same time in a cost of living crisis when we've had suppressed wages for 20 years. So if the supermarkets are making it easier for people to live and to feed their families, that is more of a societal good, to my mind, than keeping going industries that are unproductive or haven't modernised sufficiently or can't make a profit.
We might regret losing our farmers, though, Simon.
I think we have to challenge supermarkets to do better for their customers. And we've seen there's a market competition investigation into supermarkets at the moment in terms of how they use bonus schemes for individual customers, whether it's Nectar cards or other things. So there's a
Shouldn't consumers be savvy enough, though, to see through,
you have to be quite
we're not all morons.
to guide your way around some of these schemes that they have. So it's right and proper that government do investigate these matters on behalf of consumers. We need a consumer champion.
In many industries, supermarkets have very tight profit margins. We're talking 3 or 4% rather than the 20 to 50% that, for example, technology firms
or clothing.
see. Doesn't that show? Or clothing, indeed. Does it not show that there is pretty tight competition between these big supermarkets.
Oh, and some are doing much better than others, but if you look at overall profits for supermarkets, they've had exceptionally good years, whilst people are facing a cost of living crisis. And I'm just saying we need to challenge them to do better by the consumer.
Shall we move on? Because I want to bring in this interesting from ministers today, and this relates to social housing. The idea that antisocial tenants should have a 3 strikes and you're out policy when it comes to antisocial behaviour. So if you're behaving like a bit of a yobbo, consistently, you'll be ousted from your social housing and not be able to live in social housing anymore. Is this fair enough?
I think it is fair enough, actually. I think you get people, a very small minority of people, having been a politician, you would get the neighbours coming and complaining about antisocial behaviour, and so there's a very small group of people who may cause real misery for the majority of people on an estate or in a block of apartments. I think it's right. The government should have been doing it sooner, I have to say.
It's interesting, this is part of a package of measures that also seem to want to make people with a connection to the local area have priority with regard to getting onto that social housing list, but also people who have lower than average wages. It seems like there's been an expansion in people who have wages that are much higher than those you'd expect to be on social housing in this subsidised accommodation.
Well, I think one of the reasons is often that the areas surrounding social housing have higher rents and they don't want to pay it. So they can, and if they have been there for a while, they have a right to stay there. On the antisocial behaviour issue, I think it is absolutely right. Social housing is a privilege. It is not a right, no matter how long you've been there, nor how long your families have lived in the area. And I think this is a general point that could be put across society. We have been so lax over recent years, it seems to me, in policing properly antisocial behaviour on public transport, in public spaces. The very small minority who wish to do exactly what they want with no consideration for the rest of society is not penalised. And people are often scared to do something themselves because there is a risk of violence.
But
so
David, presumably the majority of people living in social housing can't afford necessarily private accommodation, private rented accommodation. So, is the government potentially making people homeless?
No,
and are we OK about that?
No, because if you don't wish to be made homeless and your only option is social housing, don't act in an antisocial way. There is an obligation upon people. As I say, this is not a right that they have, which they can then act in any way they wish. If that is their option, then they must abide by the basic systems of a civilised society.
I couldn't foresee this coming up against human rights legislation.
No, I agree with this.
You can't boot me out of my house. It's against my human rights.
Well, I can imagine that playing out. But if you go back to the Blair era, we had a policy of zero tolerance in terms of antisocial behaviour, whether that was in housing or in neighbourhoods or wherever else. And I think we really need to get back to that. But you mentioned it's part of a package. What I thought is interesting, this local connection, but it also says in the proposals, families with a close connection to the UK. I mean, surely it should be. So they're giving choice, they're giving preference in social housing, or they will do in this policy, to families with a close connection to the UK. Why not families who are from the UK? That's what I find completely fascinating. It could be much stronger than that. Give social housing to British residents first.
Well, this was sort of previewed in The Guardian a few days ago as British homes for British workers. But it does raise the question over obligations to refugees, who under various international treaties we have signed up to, we say we will house these people. Does this mean that perhaps we won't any longer be having the same sort of obligation towards these refugees? And if so, does that mean we're breaking treaty obligations?
Well, I think what's become apparent in very recent weeks and months is that the international treaties that we've signed up to many years ago are not fit for purpose today in terms of the United Kingdom. And I think there has to be a fresh review of what we've signed up to and whether it can be amended.
It is interesting, many different countries now saying that perhaps these 1950s-era obligations from times when people really didn't move in the way that huge numbers of people now move around the world. Is this something that the United Kingdom government can take on, David?
I think it's something that the United Kingdom government must take on. Most of these treaties were made in the light of the Second World War with the idea of small movements of people within Europe. There was absolutely no perspective then that there would be vast global migration and that some of that would be driven by war, some by economics and some by changes in climate. How could they possibly have foreseen that? And to say that we must stick with 70 and 80-year-old treaties and legislation simply because they were nice at the time is an abdication of responsibility that no government has the right to abdicate. We must look after the best interests of this country. That is the point of the UK government, not to look nice in the eyes of people who are never affected by the results and the consequences of these pieces of legislation.
Well, on that note, thank you very much indeed to Simon and David, of course. But up next, it is the one and only Martin Dobney. Martin, what's coming up on your fabulous show?
Well, we've got a packed menu full of red meat, as you'd expect from Westminster. First of all, ONS data out today shows an extra 6 million will emigrate to the UK by 2036. Can we cope? Immigration nation is Britain full. Next, we'll be crossing live to Sheffield Crown Court, where a grooming gang leader will be sentenced for drugging and raping a 13-year-old girl. We'll have all the latest on that. We've also got an exclusive with Penny Mordaunt, the Conservative leader that the Labour Party fear the most. She's unveiling a new statue to help mark Britain's role in ending the slave trade. That should raise a few eyebrows. And also, is it time for a farmer's army for a French-style revolution in Britain? We've got a farmer who says that's exactly what we should do. That's all coming up. That's after your weather.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello again, it's Aidan McGibbon here from the Met Office with the GB News forecast. Dry and bright for most of us today, but there are some areas of cloud around, and then it turns increasingly windy overnight as areas of low pressure once again pass close to the north of Scotland. At the moment, higher pressure to the south is bringing a pleasant afternoon to many areas. Decent spells of sunshine for Wales, the Midlands, northern England, and then as the sun goes down, those clear spells push southeastwards, so that by the end of the night, actually, there'll be a touch of frost in some parts of central and southern England and some fog patches. Otherwise, it turns increasingly cloudy towards the north and the west, and it turns increasingly windy by dawn, with heavy rain arriving into the north of Scotland, gales developing widely across northern parts of the UK, wind gusts of 65 miles an hour in places, and for the far north of Scotland, the risk of 85-mile-per-hour wind gusts during the morning and early afternoon. Now, the rain pushes south across Scotland, Northern Ireland and into northern England by the afternoon, followed by blustery showers. A very unsettled day to come in the north, but in the south, although it turns cloudier and breezier, actually it's largely dry and relatively mild. Now, the rain and the wind clear through for the start of Thursday. A fine day follows for many. There'll be some high cloud around, but otherwise, for the vast majority, it is drier before further unsettled weather arrives into Friday and the weekend, but it does stay very mild.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christys Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be